evening and welcome to the July 10th, 2023 meeting of the Garrett Park Town Council. I call this meeting to order and I have before you the agenda. Are there any changes or modifications for council members? Okay.
Are we going to be voting on the proposed or needed speed bump on Weymouth at this meeting?
We're not. It's we have the traffic related things are just under presentations. They're not. Okay. We're not expecting that. The one change that I think I'm going to suggest, given that Todd's not here, is at the very end of the meeting. We have updates from Councilmember Eisenstadt and me about the Montgomery Municipal Cable Conference, and since he's not here, I think we should just kind of cross that off the list. So, and is y'all okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that. It's Jerry Lee.
Okay, thanks, Jerry.
So it's just the last thing with about the PEG grants.
Yeah, no. Before that, it's town updates. Under updates.
Okay. Takeaways. Yep, no problem.
Steve, you okay with taking that off? You're muted if you were speaking.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So with that one change, are we those in favor of approving the agenda as adjusted?
Phil approves.
Aye.
Great. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the approval of minutes. We have the minutes from the meeting from last month, June 12th, 2023. These were circulated and we had the opportunity to make changes. Are there any additional changes that need to be made to reflect the action that was taken last month? Not hearing any.
I had one small change
okay.
on the minute. Yeah, one small
Yes.
change on the very last thing. I was talking about conversation about the sidewalk by the tennis courts. It doesn't quite capture what my point was. Yes, there is space limitations, but then only minimal curvature in the sidewalk, which is not desirable. My point was that I don't think we should be doing dipsy doodles, kind of like what we're done on Oxford at the last minute. Like literally, I think the morning before construction, I think it made it look worse. I would not recommend doing it again on Waverly was the point, but I'd appreciate it if that could be fixed.
Okay, Barb, did you catch that?
Stephen, can you give me language that you'd like to see included, just so I make sure I capture the sentiment correctly?
Maybe instead of saying which was not desirable at the end, I just say that the curving of the sidewalk is unnecessary and would not recommend doing dipsy doodles like was done in Oxford.
And I have one correction to the minutes as well. I spoke to Barb. I know I wasn't here, but I do not support hiring a consultant to decide what we're doing with the parks before we have a consensus or a plan in place to give to the consultants. I think an open-ended contract would not be a good idea. So I don't want to have the minutes reflect that I would support that.
So let's where is that?
I can, it's on page.
There it is, page 4.
Yeah, do you want me just to strike that? I had it on page 5, Lisa. It's the last full paragraph at the bottom, since I was relaying my understanding of our conversation. Would you prefer that paragraph just be struck?
Well, I wrote to Joanna and I don't recommend the hiring of a consultant without a plan or a proposed use of the park space in place. So that's what it should say.
So except that because these are minutes, they need to reflect what was said. So if we could take it out, take out the paragraph entirely Otherwise, we would need to, I think, correct me if
Okay.
I'm wrong, Barb, we'd have to leave it as it is because it
That's what was
reflects
said,
the
right?
communication.
I mean, these are obviously not transcripts, so I think, as the mayor's saying, I think the cleaner thing, Lisa, is if you're uncomfortable with that, if I somehow misinterpreted what you said, is just to strike the paragraph.
Okay,
Would that be okay?
that's fine.
With everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other changes, or can we vote on the approval of this? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes as adjusted?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, that's all in favor. Thank you very much. Moving on now to presentations by residents. We have a very full agenda tonight, and so we're going to do our best to limit these to 3 minutes per person. The way we're going to do this is it will be a sort of the council and I will be on the receiving end of these things. We'll be listening. This is not going to be a back and forth debate discussion. We want to hear what you have to say, and then we will take those things into consideration, not during this portion. So if you want to talk about something that's on the agenda later, now is the opportunity to talk about that. We will be, appreciating your helping us to continue moving things along. And a clarifying thing about, I suspect that a few people are interested in talking about the traffic engineering report. And so I want to point out that the agenda calls for that to be a presentation from the engineers, not an action item. So what we will be doing with that piece of the meeting is listening to what they have to say, asking clarifying questions from them, and then identifying what other information we need to gather so that the conversation can commence. This is not necessarily not looking for decision-making on this tonight, but rather just gathering information. So I saw Chuan Luo, that she raised her hand. I'm not sure the order of operations, but that's the one I saw first.
Joanna, if I may.
Please. Oh, yes,
I
I'm sorry.
previously indicated that those who kind of contacted me first would be on the list, and that would be Tony.
Sorry, my apologies. Yes, please. Barb, I'm going to allow you to, do you want to do since you know the order of operations or all that?
The only person that I heard from was Tony, but I can certainly call on folks who have their hands raised.
Okay.
I say Tony was the only person I heard from, and Todd just joined us, by the way.
Okay. All right. Welcome, Todd. We are just starting the presentations by residents, Todd, and quick catch up. We're going to do 3 minutes per person, and then not having back and forth, not having discussion about the items, just receiving the comments from residents.
Yeah, and Joanna, if I may, before everyone starts, if everyone could please, who is speaking, please give me your street address, because I need to include that in the minutes, and that would be helpful. So I think with that, Tony, you want to take it away and let me know when you're ready for me to show the slides you sent to me.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll show the 2 slides at the very end. So yeah, I'm Tony Altar, and I think my comments were very similar to many people. I wanted to weigh in on what we see here on a day-to-day basis. All the people that drive in this area are quite familiar with the situation, and really want to emphasize the positive things that can be done. So I think one idea of installing a yield sign at the top of Argyle for cars merging onto Kenilworth, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, that's what most drivers do anyway. And I think that would take care of all the problems, which actually I don't even think there are any or significant problems. Again, I live right at that intersection, and there's never been an issue, except for the need to yield there. Placing stop signs at those intersections, at that intersection, I think would be very disruptive.
You can't.
All right. So I think that would be disruptive and unnecessary. It also would probably lower our property value a little bit and create pollution and noise. Every car that would have to stop at that intersection, which is ridiculous, would now be a real pollution generating and noise generating. In fact, it also increased congestion at the intersection. It would not decrease it because now cars would be stopping and starting and having to negotiate. So I think the yield sign, which other people also have suggested, makes a lot of sense. I also noticed that the drawing itself had the stop signs on the wrong side of the street and they were facing the wrong way. So the consultant that the council has hired to do this doesn't seem like they're very professional. I understand they've also, they installed cameras to monitor what was going on at that intersection and at Waverly. I was really curious how much we paid for this kind of expertise. I also noticed that the newest drawing of the renovation of Waverly also prevents egress from one of the residents. So just seems like a real second-rate operation. I'm curious who these people are and how much we paid for this. Regarding Waverly and Kenilworth, again, I feel like a lot of other people putting 5 different stop signs there really makes very little sense. The new plan that I saw might have some merit. It probably increases green space and removes some of the roadway. That might be a plus. Again, not needing 5 stop signs, but also an unanticipated consequence of this design might be shining every car that stops on Waverly to turn right or left on Kenilworth at night would be shining their lights directly into one of the neighbors' yards. Property listed as number 10 on the new map that was just distributed. So I wonder how they feel about it. In fact, maybe this original V-shaped design was designed just to do that, to prevent headlights from shining directly into one of the neighbors' houses. So those are my comments. The 2 slides, if you want to put them up.
Sure.
We have time. I wanted to show what I think is a much better use of our time and money. I don't know if people recognize this, but in fact, this is the very same building that the town council meets in. It's in the back. To me, it's a real embarrassment to see our properties deteriorating in this way and for attentions to be diverted elsewhere. So I'd really like to see the town work on this. And the next slide shows the same area, our drainage system. Also, if we can go to the next slide, and that's the last.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, basically it's a $20 fix, but the drainage system is there's a huge hole in it. So water coming off the roof goes right into the foundation. So let's take care of our own homes and maybe let the residents who see the traffic on a regular basis drive there all the time. I'm appreciating that the town council is weighing our input because I think we really know what's going on.
There you go. Okay.
Tony, is that picture of the peeling paint, the town hall, I assume?
Hey, yeah, it is, Lisa.
That's the back wall of the town hall. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Joanna, do you just want me to call on people and randomly?
I think Chuan Lua was next.
Okay.
But then, yes, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone. And I'll try to make it short within 3 minutes. I understand tonight's topic is about traffic. Well, I'm here with my neighbor, Michelle Cornell. I am at address 4425 Strathmore. Michelle's address is 4423 Strathmore. So we have a shared driveway and we're pretty close to Beach Drive. I wanted to say, well, we're talking about safety issue, traffic. I can hear a train. The last. Yeah, no, it should be. Sorry for the train. At least we can prove we live here. So within the last half a year, there were 3 accidents happen right in front of our driveway, and mainly due to people coming from Beach Drive, driving to Strathmore, that's direction. And then I understand Strathmore in front of our 2 houses are state highway. There's not much we can do. However, I'm hoping perhaps town can do something. putting out a sign for safety reasons. So people coming from Beach Drive would not drive so fast. And also I'm trying to keep this brief so I can send out the pictures, or I can go in more details. Those 3 accidents, but they were crashed right in front of our driveway. And a few years ago, I also sent an email on the listserv describing my experience trying to cross Strathmore on Keswick, and cars coming so fast from Beach Drive. One car stopped, the other car right behind him did not stop. So the 2 cars crashed right in front of me while I'm having a stroller pushing my baby. A few years ago, I described the whole detail on the listserv. So all this is to say, we'd appreciate, while we're talking about traffic, we're talking about safety. We have 6 kids under grade 5 living on our little block. They walk to home from school. If town can use the consultant to research if there's any possible ways to put a sign to increase, to help on safety. Anything to add?
So I think we're really, I don't know what the town can do versus what the state can do, but we're really looking for something that's going to get these people to slow down. We have video. I have a doorbell camera, so I can show you videos. It's bad. This is so unsafe. It's unsafe for us. It's unsafe for anybody walking their dog. These cars are hopping on our curbs and getting into these like mind-blowing accidents. A speed camera, a stoplight, like something that like a sign honestly is not really, it's a start, but it's not gonna do it. And somebody's gonna die here. And I don't want it to be my child.
I don't want to be my child. I don't want to be any child. In fact, there's so many people using Keswick to cross the street, going to the pool. We really can't wait until an accident happens. 3 accidents already happened in the last half a year. We really can't wait until someone dies.
So we're looking for, somebody to help. It's my understanding that somebody came out and did some kind of survey or something and deemed it fine. It's not fine. And again, there's all these people crossing the street for the pool. We have those like orange flags, and using those like barely do anything to cross the street. And something just needs to be done because it's completely unsafe. So if someone could kind of point us in the right direction and kind of help us and give us an understanding of how we can actually make something happen, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm just going to go kind of across the top. Eileen.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm gonna leave my house because my fire alarm's going off because I just burnt dinner. So sorry about that. I'm Eileen Kelly, 11002 Kenilworth Avenue. So I'm at the point where Waverly and Kenilworth meet. I just don't want the town council to get distracted or overwhelmed by the amount of other information about other things regarding traffic. We have a yield sign on Kenilworth. It needs to be picked up. It needs to be moved to the triangle so that people on Waverly yield before they continue down toward the light as they enter Kenilworth. They don't yield. They don't have to yield. And as someone's coming in, as has been talked about on the listserv, as you're coming in from Strathmore on Kenilworth, you have right of way. The person on Waverly believes they have right of way. Probably we need a stop sign. Probably we should reconfigure the whole triangle. There's a lot of solutions, and it might take Garrett Park years to figure out the long-term plan. But tomorrow, someone could pick up the yield sign, move it across, and put it on the triangle, and we could at least have a short-term solution that directs traffic in a substantially safer way. It's very dangerous, and I do experience people being confused and almost bumping into each other on a weekly basis. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for all of your hard work for our town. I appreciate it from each and every one of you.
Okay. Phil, I don't know if I'm guessing it's Jean who wishes to speak, but just taking a guess there.
Hi, everybody. It's Jean Haran. I'm at 4419 Cambria. And I'd like to talk about the email traffic the past few weeks and a half that seems to be pointing in the direction of getting back to neighbors and our vast resources of talent before hiring consultants. So town council members, I have an ask tonight, and that is to really consider when it's appropriate to, oops, I didn't turn on my timer, Kayla, I just did. When it's appropriate to hire a consultant and when it's appropriate to get neighbors together. I just want to give you a little story that blew my mind, probably about 10 years ago or so. The council planned to cut down the bamboo in Porcupine Woods because it was invading into properties. It was taking up a lot of the walking path area. Everybody on the council thought that was a great idea until neighbors started protesting and children started walking into the next town council meeting with signs calling the bamboo magical and demanding that the bamboo not be cut down. I think the council was caught off guard. They figured they were doing something right for the community without realizing that, in fact, they were upsetting a constituency. The bamboo is still there today. Which leads me to my point of camping onto Chris Keller's very astute email last week, where he proposed that we get back to the days of using the knowledge base that we have here in town. I know, council, you're aware that the mayor has disbanded the Parks and Open Space Committee. That was a group of neighbors. We had a track record of working with those residents around projects to get their feedback on what might work or what might not work. And our last project before being disbanded was the Yandell property at the end of Kenilworth, that's north, across from Donna Calajon and next to Naveed. It's a house that the town now owns. We brought together as a Parks and Open Space Committee every neighbor who lives around, abuts the entire perimeter of that property. We talked to them about their vision for having the house knocked down and what might go after it. And Barbara Matthews has taken that information and she's now shopping around for a proposal. That's the right way to do things. And now we're hearing that we're looking at hiring another consultant who will bring a vast design to Cambria Avenue. And there's so many neighbors who use that space, live near that space, and nobody's been talked to about that at all. So tonight, council, I urge you to reconsider convening a neighbor group, task force, Parks and Open Space Committee, whatever you want to call it. But consider, whoops, I've got 10 seconds left. Consider going to the neighbors with all of the talents, resources, and history that we have, rather than spending a lot of money on a grand vision that could end up being another bamboo poster child. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Perry?
Hi, everyone. I was shocked to see when I looked at the plan for the future of the Waverly-Kenilworth intersection that the added strip of green grass is actually in front of my driveway. And it with no acknowledgement that there's a driveway there and no acknowledgement of how that would work. So that seems to me to be a very careless thing to do. And I assume that these planners have been to the town and looked at things, but I'm not really confident that they have. My second point is that, and it's one Chris Keller may want to speak to or has made, is that this is a historic town with a historic district. And I think, having served on the Historic Preservation Committee for a number of years, I'm pretty sure that they would need Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission permission to make a change as radical to that as that intersection change. And as far as I can tell, the planners have no interest in or recognition of the historic value of the town plan, which does present a wonderful sweeping view as you drive into town, you drive down Kenilworth and you drive down Waverly. It's the way the town was designed in something like 1887. And I would just add, there's increasingly a loss of sense of the historic value of this town, which is what makes the town so charming and unique and appealing to so many people. And where I noticed that just recently was on the town website, the new, I think, newly designed website, where there is a pretty picture of wildflowers, which is a tremendous irony considering that the town is a livable arboretum, and considering that the town has a good number of historic houses. So it seems to me that the website is losing all sense of the historic interest of the town. That's what I have to say. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Robin?
Thank you. Sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Okay. Hi. I'm Robin Daly. I live at 11218 Kenilworth Avenue. And I just wanted to add my thoughts. I didn't see expressed in the emails that people submitted, but I think a lot of this confusion resulted from something that probably can't be fixed, which is the naming of Kenilworth and Waverly. Like Kenilworth starts out as the main road, then turns into the branch road, and Waverly becomes the main road. And I think that can't be changed at this point, but I do think it adds to the confusion for folks who are non-residents. So all of us who live here know how it works, but we have a lot of non-residents who are going in to the post office or to the restaurant, or maybe DoorDash guys. They make that turn at Kenilworth and then maybe aren't paying attention to the GPS when that road forks. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. Something that's in the town's control that doesn't really require consultants or anything is there's a sign in the middle of that triangle, which could be improved to help people who are non-residents understand where the town center is. So that's one point. And then two, and I guess, Tony Altar, with my apologies, I'm going to disagree with you. Coming down from the north side of Kenilworth, as I do multiple times a day, there are frequently cars parked on the side of the road, which, happens. That's no big deal. But we're sort of moved into the center of the road. And then cars are coming up from that sledding hill. They're frequently obscured by the bamboo. And multiple times, and I'm a very careful and slow driver, multiple times I've had to swerve because cars just come up that hill and turn. And a lot of it is because they're non-residents who are circling back from the post office or the restaurant. But since we're already in the middle of the road as we're driving down and then a car suddenly appears, I have multiple times had to swerve to avoid an accident there. So I would like to see a yield or a stop sign at the top of that hill. And so I guess my third point would just be that speaks to how those of us who live here, who are all well-intended and very familiar, can have different points of view. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That's everyone who had their hand up to speak. Is there anyone else? Steve Walker?
Hey there. I just wanted to say I had helped spearhead the Weymouth Street petition for speed bumps. And, I was initially very disappointed to see that we were not going to get speed bumps. We were going to get a stop sign. But I thought about it a little bit longer and I was like, okay, well, maybe I really need to hear what these experts have to say before I can start raising the pitchforks and saying that they're morons. So, I look forward to having my mind changed. I would really like speed bumps, and And I hope that is still a possibility, but if it's not, there might be good reasons to not get them. So, you know, I really do like it that you guys hire people. I think it's a real shot in the arm for moving projects because, you know, you all have day jobs, you do not have time, and these things will get bogged down and they will take forever. And even though everyone's really mad about this project, it really went fast. And I think there's going to be some change because of it. And it really wasn't that much money. So I guess I want you to do that more. I want you to hire people that really know what they're doing, that are outside this town, that can come in with fresh ideas, because we always just get bogged down, or it feels like we get bogged down in the same sort of repeating fights that I'm just learning about as someone who's only been here since 2017. You know, I don't want to wait for change. I don't want to wait for a better Cambria Park where it's right next to the street, or a dog park that I took my dog one time and I thought this was the worst dog park I've ever been to because it's a broken down tennis court. I would love those things to get fixed and fast while I've got little kids that could really enjoy that playground. But so maybe that's a different thought than what's been conveyed. And I also strongly support something being done on Kenilworth. That I cannot see through that bamboo. I find that a very stressful intersection. So yes, please do something about that. Thank you.
Gerald, yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Mr. Welker a question about the petition.
Oh, sure.
Mr. Welker, could you characterize the percentage of Weymouth Street residents who signed the petition, please?
I would put it north of 60%, south of 90%. I could probably point out all the people that no one declined to sign it, but not everyone saw it. So, you know, I figured it was enough to start a conversation, and then I assumed y'all would reach out to our street and get more concrete info.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Sure.
Anyone else wish to speak? I don't see any hands yet.
All right, I can take back over if that works.
Okay,
Barb.
thanks, Savannah.
Thank you for for running that. Let's see, the time is 8:03 and we're moving on to the presentation by Garrett Slade. I think, who is it? It's Will Zide who will be doing this presentation. Yes. Wonderful. Welcome, Will. Thank you for being here. Want to sort of lay out what I'm expecting from this, and that is for you to share with us the work that you did and your recommendations, and for us to listen and receive them. And then if council has clarifying questions, we can put those to you. And then if there is other information that we need to gather, we want to gather after this, we'll do that. But the purpose of this is to receive from you your work. So if you want to go ahead, I appreciate your being here. Thanks.
Absolutely. So I have a PowerPoint. I have this broken up into each of the 4 tasks that we looked at. So if you'd like to stop after each task to ask questions, we can do it that way, to keep it related to each task, or we can wait till the end. It's up to you.
Yeah, let's break it up into the different.
Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen here. And we'll see my screen now. Okay, so I'm Will Zide. I'm a transportation engineer. I'm with Garrett Slade. I'm a civil engineer focusing in the transportation sector for the last 13 years in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia region. Slide here. So we were asked to look at 4 different tasks for the town of Garrett Park. Those were a speed bump assessment on Weymouth Street, reviewing the request that was submitted by the community. We were also looking, you won't see on this page here, we were asked to look at the site triangle and code language for the town. and to recommend suggestions on that to sort of help with maintaining sight distance of intersections as it relates to plantings. And then we were asked to look at the intersection configurations of Waverly Avenue and Kenilworth Avenue, as well as Argyle Avenue and Kenilworth Avenue. And here we have just sort of a summary of the overall. And I recognize that on the summary graphic that was sent out, the stop sign is sort of on the other side of the road. This is really just meant to be diagrammatic for the purposes of showing stop sign locations. Now into just a summary here. So we're going to review the existing speed bump division and evaluate the needs and impacts for the speed bump. The side triangle assessment, as I said, is related, really specifically related to plantings and obstructions along the roadside and maintaining safe operations. And then sort of the lack of controls at the Waverly Avenue, Kenilworth Ave, and Argyle Avenue and Kenilworth Avenue intersections, just sort of reviewing against industry standards and then checking what could be done there to improve operations. Okay. So task one for the Weymouth speed bump. So we reviewed all of the typical standards for speed bumps, and you have to keep in mind that there are several different things. It comes down to speed, volume, the length of the road segment. Speed bumps on very short roadways is not always recommended. If there's not a high enough volume of traffic, they're typically not recommended. But sort of the two primary warrants for it are speed and volume. And this section of Weymouth, we collected 48 hours of speed data, and we did not meet those minimum requirements that we used. We compared this against Montgomery County's guidelines for speed bump warrants. Given that we're sort of within the overall Montgomery County road network, driver expectations coming in and out of Garrett Park sort of fall under that. And Montgomery County developed their standards based on industry standards as well. So we were under the 85th percentile speed, I believe was only about 21 miles an hour compared to the 20 mile per hour speed. Now, one of the other things that comes into play with speed bumps is you can install a speed bump, even let's say if you're not warranted, if it's not going to impact other roads. Now, with Weymouth dead ending to the south here, installing a speed bump is not going to cause somebody that was traveling through to the west, since they can't, to divert to another road, thus increasing volume on another roadway. So we're not saying that you can't install a speed bump on Weymouth. Our findings are that it does not meet really the critical warrants that would say it's critically necessary to go out and install a speed bump. Now, what we did see in our review is, as we have on the screen here, the Oxford Street and Weymouth Street intersection was sort of what I would call the missing stop sign on the north leg. So for a T intersection, there are really two general configurations that you would have. You could have a stop sign just on the perpendicular approach of the intersection. That would be sort of a standard two-way stop control condition, where the through route, which would be Weymouth in this case, both directions move freely. Having only one of the through route, the sort of the non-perpendicular leg of the T controlled, is atypical. It is not what most drivers would expect as they're approaching an intersection. A driver traveling eastbound on Oxford I understand it's written on the sign, but people don't always see the language on the sign, signs get dirty, etc. If they look to their left and see a stop sign as they're looking to see traffic coming, they would likely expect the other direction of Weymouth to be stopping as well. So this is a situation where we would say right away is not necessarily clear at this intersection. And we would recommend, and it sort of ties into the request for a speed bump, is that we recommend that a stop sign be installed on Weymouth. That needs to be done either way, in our opinion. And that could also provide some traffic calming effect for what was mentioned from the community. And then as sort of a long term is to reevaluate a few months after that happens. And if people still feel that speeds are excessive along this approach, a speed bump could be installed at the town's discretion. There'd be no reason not to, if you will, even though you don't necessarily meet the critical warrants that say you should go out and do it right now. Here's just some of that data. So we observed on a day 55 vehicles, 21 mile per hour, 85th percentile speed. 85th percentile is the general standard for reviewing speeds in speed studies. We also compared, there was a comment, I believe it was in the petition about excessive traffic. So we took sort of the industry standards, we compared those against some jurisdiction, like some specific rates that convert vehicle trips into adjusted vehicle trips for based on like where you are within Montgomery County that take account for proximity to transit, all those types of things. And what we would expect for the 8 single family homes past the point of where we collected our speed study on Weymouth, we would expect about 50 vehicles in each direction during a typical day. And we counted 60 in one day, 52 in the other. So, those numbers roughly equate to what we would expect. And there's obviously some variance in this 50 and 49. So there could be some additional traffic on that road from people picking up and dropping off at the end, but it's certainly not, the numbers don't say that it's excessive, if you will. It's not double or triple the road's expected daily volume. So that is generally the findings coming through here. We have a breakdown. This is all in the report that we submitted. So the critical ones, which is 7 miles per hour above the posted speed limit, we did not meet that. We were only 21 versus 20. We did not exceed the 100 vehicles per hour, and we did not meet the minimum length of a road segment. So if all of these, or even if 2 of the 3 of these were met, we would say that, yeah, you probably, a speed bump would be a good thing to prioritize to go out and install. Since these 3 weren't met, we would recommend as a first step would be to install the stop sign, reevaluate in a couple months, and if everybody still feels that people are traveling too fast down the road, then consider installation of the speed bump. And that is generally the conclusion. If a speed bump is installed, we would just note that you generally want to be at least 200 feet away from an intersection to install a speed bump. And you should also have a clear line of sight traveling over any grade. So there is obviously a hill that goes down Weymouth. So you do not want to crest a hill and then all of a sudden see the speed bump, if you will. Then you can hit the speed bump at an excessive speed and lose control. So, we went out there, we looked. If you come down 200 feet, you can roughly see that from the crest of the hill. So this would be the general location we would recommend that speed bump if it were to be installed. And we would also recommend this design right here. Montgomery County's standard is a little bit bigger than this. It's 12 feet flat, I believe, and then 6 feet. It's almost double the other speed bumps that we found in the town of Garrett Park. This standard right here from the Maryland Manual of Uniform Traffic Control is consistent with the speed bump you have over on Kenilworth. So maybe this is what a contractor has used in the past. And so this is the same design we would recommend for that speed bump if you do end up installing one. So that's the general findings on the speed bump. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
It's Lisa Mack. So on Weymouth going, I guess it's north towards Strathmore, putting a stop sign at the intersection of Oxford and Weymouth. My understanding is there's no driveway for the house that's there, and putting a stop sign would preclude that person from parking in front of their house. So they were very much against it. Is that your understanding?
So it would be stopping the travel lane. So it's already where vehicles are traveling as they're passing through the intersection. So it shouldn't impact further impacts. If people are parking out there today, they would presumably be able to park. We would recommend that people don't park right in front of a stop sign, but on a quiet residential street, it happens.
It's legal to park in front of a stop sign?
If if there is no sign posted that says you can't stop from, here to the corner. Because sometimes you'll see no parking, right, with the arrow pointing towards the intersection. That's usually to maintain clear space at the intersection. We could look at the width of that road, but do people already park along that street today?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
and so it must be wide enough then for traffic to move both ways. So the stop would be, you could paint the stop bar so that it's offset from the curb, so that it maintains that space along the curb for somebody to park.
Okay, thank you.
Todd, if you wanted to go ahead and make a statement.
Yes, thank you. I guess I just really wanted to ask a question, which is, if the citizens want a speed bump, I guess the question is there any reason, I mean, what's the cost benefit? That is to say, what are the liabilities of having a speed bump where perhaps by county standards, it's not objectively needed, but on the other hand, people want it. Certainly there's the cost of the speed bump, but is there some other factor that maybe we're not thinking? I don't know, wear and tear on the cars as they go over a speed bump. I mean, is there a compelling reason not to put one in?
So first off, for safety considerations for speed bumps is you don't put speed bumps on roads that are over a certain speed. I want to say it's like 40 miles an hour off the top of my head, because that can be very dangerous. We don't have that situation here. So it's not a matter of if somebody's traveling too fast here, it's because they were breaking the law, right? They were speeding. So it's not from that. Speed bumps generally, I mean, the reason a lot of places have standards for them is because they get requested a lot, right? And you have to have sort of a neutral, unbiased approach to evaluating where they can be installed. It's not always the initial cost of the installation. On higher volume roads, they do take a beating. It's maintenance. It's not just put a speed bump in and forget about it. It's come out, wear it out, replace it every so often. And that can really start to eat into DPW budget. So, for those reasons, otherwise there'd be a speed bump on every street in Montgomery County, residential street in Montgomery County, if they just put them in. So,
all right.
I mean, they do have to have that neutral. So that's why they have the standards the way they are. But to answer your question, 40 miles an hour and up is where you just wouldn't even consider it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Phil, you had wanted to ask a question?
Yes. So what I wanted to say was, and I'm basically echoing what Lisa said, was that the reason that, and I remember discussing this thing, and the reason that we didn't put that third stop sign in was because the people who live in that house, basically right at that intersection, wanted to be able to park there. At the time, it was Michael Spector, and he raised a lot of objections about not being able to park near his house because it'd be parking in the middle of an intersection. Yeah, especially if we put a stop sign in. So we decided not to put the stop sign in that direction to allow people to park in that general area. Now, if what you're saying is that we can park near or next to a stop sign, then maybe that's not such a big deal. If not, then we have to take into consideration the residents who are in that area, especially if they don't have a driveway.
So that's a fair point, and I would say, so I'd always recommend not parking right at the stop sign, right? So it would be nice to have sort of a clear space of at least like a vehicle length before it. I would say that in my field, we would always prioritize the safety of the intersection from the sort of inconvenience of having to park an additional like 15 to 20 feet, if you will, away from the intersection. So that would be our recommendation. The other way to go too is, like I said, it's just an atypical configuration. If there was no stop on the other approach, on the other direction of Weymouth, it would be in a typical configuration with just a stop on the T, right? Just a stop on the perpendicular approach. It's the fact that one of the through approaches of Weymouth is stopped that make this sort of a dangerous situation. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I got one more thing that went into sort of our thinking on this is, throughout the town of Garrett Park, now, obviously, as you all know, there are generally no sidewalks anywhere. So everybody walks in the street, parents with strollers. I live in a very similar neighborhood. We don't have sidewalks. We walk our kids in the street. We ride our bikes in the street. And, coming through intersections with an atypical configuration and people not necessarily knowing what they're doing, it can create not only hazards for the drivers, but hazards for the people walking. So our recommendation is to make right of way clear and provide a safe intersection.
Thank you. Councilmember Paskowski, you just put a photo in the discussion. Did you want to say something about this?
I was trying to find my mute button. Yeah, I just was out of curiosity looking to see what was happening there. And there is, this is a photo from a year ago, but there was a car kind of right across the way. That sounds like the stop sign would be off to the right. I guess there wouldn't really be anything needed to signs, no parking where the trash cans are or where that car is, but it's a little unusual to me to like park opposite a T intersection. I think this one's not so bad, but it's always a little bit disconcerting when you come up Argyle, there's no stop sign and there's always a bunch of cars parked across the way. So you kind of had to feather the gas to be able to get out there and, be ready to stop if somebody comes flying down the hill from your right. So it's just always a little bit precarious parking in intersections like this. I kind of sympathize with the homeowner there, but it's a tricky spot.
Okay, Lisa, I see you, but I wanted to make a comment real quick. Since the question about this was the speed hump as opposed to the stop signs, I want to make sure that, this is probably going to come down to what we want to do as neighbors more than, what do the data say in terms of, we don't meet the traffic, we don't meet the volume, we don't meet the speed, that kind of thing. But I think it's important. I think that what the residents on that street wanted to express was that this is not really a typical street because of the poor understanding of whether it's a through street. So you have a lot of traffic coming and thinking that they can cut through to the other neighborhood. That makes it more traffic than would otherwise be there, as well as that that crest that you talked about. So I think this might be one of those situations where we well, I'm not sure, since we're not making decisions, it's not really important, except to say that this might be one of those exceptions, one of those places where we need to think of a safe way to do this to make the street better, even though maybe the data doesn't support it. So Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to answer Jerry's question. In the package of the minutes and the town council package, there is a copy.
What was the question? I'm not sure I know what the question is.
How many people signed the petition for the speed bumps on Weymouth? Right. And it's in the package and it's 15. So that's just the answer. And Nancy Walls wrote a letter I'd like to just submit for the minutes that also support the reasons for her support of the speed bump for the community. Thank you.
Lisa, my question was the percentage, not the number, but thank you.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but it's 15.
All right. Any other council member questions before we move on to the next task?
One further quick comment. I just turned a corner on Google Earth and I noticed something. Sounds like it was being considered to put a stop sign, which is normal to have either 1 or 3 at a T intersection. It is very odd to have 2, but it sounded like I think as Will was saying, maybe put the speed bump past the crest. I wonder if maybe it would be better to put it down kind of where the telephone pole is, almost like right before where you would put that stop sign in, just to be normal. Because then even if people ignore that other stop sign, they're going to slow down before they get to that intersection. And that would help for clarity for people in Oxford. And it would also slow people coming down flying over the top of that hill. But just a thought, maybe just move that speed bump down the hill.
Will, what would that be like? Would that be something?
So if I'm understanding that correctly, you're saying closer to the Oxford intersection, is that right?
correct? Yeah, maybe like right after the last driveway, going down
Yeah,
towards the
so-
intersection.
So general guidelines from Montgomery County and from ASHTO, I believe in METCD, is at least 200 feet from an intersection.
Okay.
You're just not supposed to place them that close. And the reason that, so we were saying meet that minimum of 200 from the intersection, because that gets it as far away from the hill crest as possible without starting to encroach on putting it too close to the intersection.
Got it.
Just you don't necessarily want somebody who's anticipating getting to an intersection, right? They're looking for vehicles and then they hit a speed bump and can lose control at the intersection where other things are going on. People may be crossing, people are turning, that type of thing.
My understanding was that the residents, at least that I talked to, wanted to keep people who parked at the end, especially if they happen to live in Parkside, from racing up the street. And so putting one, just say halfway down the hill, for lack of better words, would be a better idea, because it's going to force them to have to slow down before they hit that speed bump. But, so I think the idea was to try and get people to slow down rather than just shooting up and down that hill like a rocket.
One of the issues with so you're really not supposed to place speed bumps on hills due to inclement weather situations where it doesn't take much for a tire, right, to lose its grip on the roadway. And so wet and snowy or icy conditions downhill at a speed bump, it'd be very easy to lose control of the vehicle at any speed. So you generally won't see speed bumps on hills for that reason.
All right, I'd like to move on to the next task, please.
Okay, so this next task, there we go. Can you hear it? Okay, so we reviewed the code language for the town of Garrett Park as it relates to plantings in the right-of-way and site distance. And just as a matter of course, here's a brief introduction. There are generally two important considerations for site distance when we're talking about an intersection. It's the intersection site distance, that is seeing around the corners, right? Seeing a car up ahead, seeing a cross, those types of things. And then there's the stopping site distance, which is the car that's approaching and how long it takes that vehicle to come to a stop if somebody pulls out in front of them. And you can kind of see here with these different speeds about what those distances are. So, if you're traveling 20 miles an hour, it takes generally, for an engineering calculation, about 115 feet to come to a safe stop. Between seeing the person, you have perception reaction time, which is the time it takes you to realize you need to hit the brakes, you hit the brakes, and then you bring your car to a stop. That obviously goes up as the speeds increase. You see here on top, you can see a site distance exhibit. I believe this one comes from MCDOT. Take a 0.6 feet back from the edge line of the road, and you can pretend that a vehicle is stopped right here. There's a driver that's sort of on the driver's side of the car, right up against the center line. He is looking across to his right to see a vehicle coming, and he is looking to his left to see a vehicle coming before making his next movement. Now, as you start to place things along the edge of the road, that line starts to get blocked as you move it over. Another important thing to look at on the bottom one here, this comes from ASHTO. And this is pretty appropriate for sort of like the Kenilworth intersection that we've been talking, Kenilworth and Waverly. As you're coming up to a skewed intersection, you're supposed to be able to see going across. And as this distance gets limited, that's when you have the need for stop control on approaches, et cetera, because you have to get to the intersection then before you can start to see back for a car coming. We have some exhibits on the right from SHA, just showing some of their general requirements for state routes, keeping clear spaces on the sides of roads, slopes, et cetera. Took a look at section 715, which is really the section that's relevant here. One issue that we had identified was with the wording of unpaved street areas. We were not exactly sure. Our interpretation of that is it's really meant to be the public right of way, right? It's the space that's not the paved road or a paved sidewalk where they're present, but is in the town's right of way and is, not road and not sidewalk. So somewhere where something could be planted or placed. So we would just recommend just clarifying that to just a sort of standard term of right of way, just so that there's no confusion on there on what that's supposed to mean. So landscaping within the unpaved public right of way may include grass, ground cover. The important addition here is just provided that they do not interfere with the sight line and the intersection. So you're saying you shouldn't be able to plant anything. Obviously, that's a big part of Garrett Park is being able to utilize that space. But planting should not encroach on the sight lines that are necessary for people to see oncoming traffic. Down number 3, there was a part in here on just a 5-foot wide sidewalk. We're unclear on why that was labeled. I believe that should just be meant to say walkway. Nothing should be planted to block access to any walkway, pathway, etc. Whether it be a 4-foot sidewalk, 5-foot sidewalk, or a 6-foot sidewalk. The new these last 3, 4, 5, and 6 we have added. So in no case shall new plantings or other obstructions be placed in unpaved public right of way, where they would, upon reaching their mature height, encroach upon the area within 2 feet of the sight line of the intersection. So we very much recognize that there are a lot of like existing plantings, trees, shrubs, those types of things that are there today, and that their mature heights could interfere with things. We would leave that to the town's discretion, which is already within the code, to remove those upon review as warranted. But for new plantings, an effort should be made to restrict new plantings to those that would not, upon their mature height, right, block sight lines at intersections. So just to be thoughtful in what is planted going forward. And you have the sight line and you really need a little bit of a buffer adjacent to that to account for maybe a few months of something not being trimmed. I think we've all seen, weather gets inclement between rain and snow, shrubs, trees can sag, and they can go from one line to about 3 to 4 feet over that line. So providing a little bit of buffer beyond that sight line is recommended. Number 5 is just noting that existing plantings that are on private property should be maintained so as not to encroach upon that same space. So if you plant a tree or a shrub on your own property, that's great. But just to make sure that it's maintained so that it doesn't start to block traffic coming around the intersection. And we do understand also that sometimes a property owner's property itself being fully planted within those lines may block sight lines. So this is just meant to say that if it's going to cross your property line into public space, into public right of way, that public right of way portion should be maintained at least back as far as the what can be done to maintain the sight line. Number 6, no new plantings other than grass should be permitted within the public right of way within 5 feet of the road. The intent here is to maintain space for a sidewalk or a sidewalk, in spirit, if you will, with a car parked along the side of the road or oncoming traffic where you don't have sidewalks and people are walking in a road. A pedestrian should be able to step off the road into the grass to go around a car or to avoid an oncoming car, rather than have to go around the other side of the car further into the road to avoid that car. So an effort should be made to keep that space clear going forward. So if you are going to plant a shrub, it should be planted at least 5 feet back from the roadway so that you don't have shrubs lining the actual edge of the road and sort of boxing in the pavement and giving pedestrians, cyclists, somebody on their bike, nowhere to go, if you will, if somebody's coming down the street, not paying attention, or if they've lost control, that type of thing. The other edits in here, we're really just going back to that, just public right of way, just for a standard universal term to describe town-owned property where these things could take place. And that is the end of Yes, then after this, we'll go on to the intersection figure.
Thank you for that, that language. I know, we had some issues earlier in the year that had some ambiguity in our language, so I think this was really good. Are there any questions from council members about this portion of the code language? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so.
Just a question. I guess I'm
Please.
assuming that this is proposed to, in the future, update our ordinance to include this.
Yes.
Okay, so it would have to be introduced and then discussed and then approved.
Right,
Okay.
we're not taking no action
Yeah.
tonight. This
Yeah,
is just
That's what I thought.
how.
I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Thank you, yes. Oh, sorry, Jerry, please.
That's okay. Just very quickly, I just want to say that if we do consider introducing that language, that we might want to have the Arboretum Committee review it to potentially amend it to further clarify our protection of town trees in the right of way.
Yeah, and this is not meant to, like I said, none of this was meant to say that anything that's out there today has to be taken away or anything like that. This is just, thoughtful going forward in 30, 40 years, right? These things can have big impacts where plant stuff appropriately going forward and everything can kind of get in line long term. And then we did also, obviously, with the permission from the town of Garrett Park. So the town of Garrett Park can give the town of Garrett Park permission, right, to go plant a new tree if they so choose. So.
Right.
Okay. So
Thank
we will move on now to the Waverly Avenue and Kenilworth Avenue intersection. So obviously we all know this intersection is in a triangular configuration. It really creates sort of three sub intersections. It's just a point with what we look at for intersection safety. If you have a T intersection, you've had with each road being two-way and all of the turning movements allowed, which is the case at each of these 3 points, if you will, you essentially have 9 conflict points at each of those T's. So that's 9 places where the different combinations of turning vehicles can come into contact with each other. So at this intersection, we have that 3 times. There are 27 conflict points at this intersection. From the volumes, we can see some of those are much less volume than the others, but nonetheless, there are 27 locations essentially within this intersection where vehicle paths can cross. And we have no stop control on any of those approaches. Now, yield signs have been talked about a lot. Yield signs are not meant to control a perpendicular intersection approach. Yield signs are intended to control a merging area where you can see the oncoming traffic and you can identify that you have a gap to merge into that traffic. So that is the general intent of a yield sign. So we would never recommend placing a yield sign at a 90-degree turn. At those locations, control would always be a stop sign for a 90-degree intersection location. Okay, so as I said, the only control is a yield sign that is located about right here on the southbound Kenilworth approach. One of the big considerations that we found here and was mentioned by somebody earlier, 1 or 2 people, is the encroachment of plantings on the corner where my mouse is that essentially blocks the view from Kenilworth to the short leg, the southbound Kenilworth and sort of the westbound turning movements here. Now, from the traffic counts that we collected, there was a number of people that turned left on that short leg onto Kenilworth. The southbound traffic is it's not super heavy, but 45 vehicles during the peak hour. So that's a car every minute or so. And there's a fairly heavy traffic coming northbound. The heaviest movement was really the Kenilworth to Waverly, sort of that northbound arcing through movement that doesn't have any roadways off to the right of it. So all of the intersection and conflicting traffic is to the left. So from our review, the very baseline traffic control that is needed at this intersection are the stop signs of the short leg connecting Waverly and Kenilworth. Those perpendicular approaches both need stop signs at that intersection. It's just a practical matter of transportation engineering. They should be installed to control those traffic movements. They really should be coming to a stop. Now, we have also put on here stop signs for the northbound and southbound approach at Kenilworth at this location up here. The reason for that is the limited sight distance coming around this corner. So this vehicle needs to stop, but eventually that vehicle is going to go. And when that vehicle goes, they are not going to be able to see a southbound car on Kenilworth. So they essentially have to stick their nose out, right? And if you're making a left turn, as you're making your left turn, your vision up over your right shoulder going up Kenilworth decreases and decreases. So if you're halfway into your left turn, you've lost vision uphill and somebody was coming down that comes out from around the corner. It's just not a great situation. So we recommend the stop on the southbound. Again, going back to those sidewalks along any of the roads, people do walk in the street. It's not a great situation to have a blocked sight line and a free flow approach coming around the corner. Now, at that point, you've stopped the perpendicular approach and one of the through routes. The other through needs to be stopped to make it an always stop. Same thing as we discussed over on Weymouth. We would not recommend leaving that as just two approaches stopped. We would just have all three be stopped at that point. So that covers sort of the top half up here. The stop sign here, we are looking at this as Waverly. Waverly is essentially a T, if you will. It's a T that comes in at a Y, more or less. So one of the southbound approaches should be coming to a stop. We have stopped the Waverly Avenue approach here. Since Kenilworth already stopped once here, their speed has been reduced. They will then be traveling slower as they leave this intersection to proceed south on Kenilworth. The Waverly traffic can come to a stop. They can look their vehicle and then they can proceed if they have a gap. The northbound Waverly approach, since the southbound here is stopping, they can come across and the stopped vehicles would yield right away. And they can also just continue to come around the corner. There's really no conflicting movement coming around the corner of Waverly, and it just so happens to be the highest volume movement as well. So that will help keep traffic moving along that route coming to the town. Now, coming to the long-term conceptual plan we see here on the right. This is not necessarily meant to be, you should go do this. This is really meant to be a conceptual view of what could be done out here to reduce these 27 conflict points down to the standard 9 conflict points. As part of that, you could significantly reduce the amount of paved area. You could, reduce impervious surfaces. You could gain back grass. All of that green space would now be connected to the properties and the side of the road so that people could walk out onto it and use it for things rather than have an island in the middle where people can't necessarily, and they can, but it's not always safe to walk out across the road. So all driveways as part of this would 100% be connected out through the road. This is very conceptual. It's just laid out to show that you could fit in a general alignment without losing this nice tree that's out here in the middle. This ties in. All of the driveways would connect through. This driveway would continue here. Any driveway on the corners would connect through with this. This would need to be engineered. It would be obviously a real construction effort to go out and do something like this. So this is I think that was lost in translation. We could have done a better job conveying that in our report, but this is really just meant to be sort of, if you wanted to do something here, this could reduce the conflict points, slow everybody down, bring everybody to a more traditional intersection. Historic character, all those things would play into that decision on whether or not you wanted to do something like this, obviously. But this would be something to look at if that is a direction the town wanted to go to long term. But
Okay.
the stop controls are really what we were focusing on with this review, and what we're really recommending, if you will, that something is done would be at least these short leg approaches here. And I think the always stop here and the stop sign here. The yield sign could be left in place as well.
Okay, so will I speak only for myself in saying that I'm not a big fan of all these stop signs, and actually there were a lot of other residents that said the same. So if that's not the direction we were to go, and if we were to do something much simpler, we had a resident earlier today who said, hey, why don't you just move the yield sign over, put it over by the southbound Waverly, sort of make or do whatever we can to make it clear who has the right of way and what is the main street, because it doesn't necessarily look, and I think it's ambiguous which street is the main street, whether it's going to the left, going to the right. So what would be the least invasive thing that would make it clear who has the right of way and who needs to yield?
You're not gonna like my response, because I don't think that this is the appropriate place for a yield sign with how complicated the intersection is. So understanding that, right, a lot of residents know exactly what to do here. They know what to watch for, etc. But you are going to have people that come to visit, delivery drivers, Uber Eats, all of these people that come in here that won't know what's going on. They won't know what to expect. And the way you mitigate that is with stop signs that make it very clear who has the right of way and who has to stop. It's one of the primary triggers for adding stop control, additional stop control is the ambiguity of right of way. If it's difficult to figure out who has the right of way, then something needs to be done so that everybody can readily figure it out instantly, right, upon reaching the intersection, because there's no time to spend when you're approaching an intersection trying to figure it out. Like, it should be readily apparent as you approach the intersection who should stop.
Okay, Jerry.
Now, I will say these look a lot more ominous on a schematic diagram like this than they do when they're installed. I mean, it's not going to look, it's not going to look like there's stop signs everywhere when they're installed. When you're approaching an intersection, this one will be rotated to where you're looking through the thin side of it. You'll see the face of this one. You'll see the back of this one. You won't see this one because, again, it'll be rotated 90 degrees. You're looking past it. It's just like any other intersection. Stop signs are off to the side. You usually don't notice them unless you're looking for them when you're traveling through the intersection. So I will add that. I do understand it's a lot of stop signs from going from none to 5, essentially here. We just think it's a complicated intersection, and from a traffic safety standpoint, this is what would be needed to be done to ensure that everybody knows what the right of way is. If there were clear sight lines coming around this corner, coming around the corner right here, we would not be recommending this stop sign and this stop sign. So the drivers for 2 of these 5 is that you can't see around that corner.
Okay, so I'm just worried that not wanting to be this severe will cause us to do nothing, and that doesn't fix anything. So I'm glad that we're just getting information now, and we have a lot of thinking to do. Got council members that wanted to speak. Jerry.
Yes, Mr. Zaid, I was wondering, as you visualized or conceptualized the future more drastic reconfiguration of this intersection, did you look at what the actual usefulness of the short road that crosses from Waverly to roadway that crosses from Waverly to Kenilworth, and whether that's necessary at all? I asked this question without knowing for sure what implications for the historic plan of the community might be, but I am curious to know. My reason for asking that question is what if we, instead of keeping that as a travel through roadway, we turned it into only a pedestrian pathway and closed off traffic there, or added more green space to the triangle and just extended the triangle back so that it would be truly a full Y configuration.
Yeah, so the volumes are very low on that movement. The one issue would be the turn from Waverly to go northbound on Kenilworth. And I know that's coming from right like inside the neighborhood, going back into another interior part of the neighborhood. So maybe there's not a lot of demand for that movement. But if you imagine trying to take a right turn around the nose of the interior triangle, that would be a very difficult maneuver to make coming around there. So that would be the one thing that would be somewhat of an issue, if you will. That could be mitigated by just saying no right turns there. And, the one or two people that do it would just have to find a new route to go up and take to get back southbound to go that way. But there really isn't a whole lot of usefulness of this short section right here, other than providing that right turn. Now, if you were to do that, you would definitely need to add control there to at least control one of those approaches and stop. But yeah, does that make sense? It's like this probably carries 4 vehicles per hour compared to 100 total on these approaches right here. So it's a very minimally used approach.
So I admit it was really hard to read the tiny numbers on the technical charts. So you did track the amount of traffic on that short segment, and it was approximately 4 vehicles per hour. That's actually more than I would have guessed.
I think I went high. I think I'm seeing 3 here on this graphic. So 3 to 4, but it's very low. So it's not necessary from a carrying capacity. I mean, all the volumes combined here are very low in general for a small interior residential intersection. It may seem high, but it's really only about a vehicle per minute in each direction. But it would really be for maneuvering at that intersection that you would need that sort of connection over. So I would say you wouldn't want right turns trying to come around the nose here, because they're going to be pointed into oncoming traffic when they come around. That would be the one thing that you'd want to work around. A workaround to that could be just increasing the radius here so that it's more of an arc rather than a point, like a bullnose. Instead of a bullnose, you'd have more of like a rounded bottom to that. So there probably is something that can be done there, that effect.
So a follow-on question real quick. I know this study was done, I believe, outside of the school year, but this is traveled by a bus route. Did you look at the bus route?
So we did collect our traffic counts prior to schools letting out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's one of our baseline. All of our data gets collected before schools let out, when public schools are in session.
So did you factor in how the school bus uses that triangle at all in your assessment?
Or in that long term, in this right here?
In any of the assessment?
So I don't know that, well, in just our general assessment with the stop signs wouldn't change anything with the maneuverability of the school buses. They would just be coming to a stop, just like anybody else does.
All right.
There's no loss of maneuvering, if you will, with the placement of the stop signs. It's just controlling.
Thank you.
All right, Phil. You're muted.
Yep. So my questions revolve around, first of all, the yield sign. Why not just put a stop sign there, and then that way both parties have to stop, because otherwise the people coming up from out of town or up from the center of town on Waverly have to look around their shoulder to make sure somebody's not coming. And there could be some confusion with the yield as to who's going to stop for who. Versus just putting a stop sign there. And if you put a stop sign that's a little bit past where the yield sign is, because I walked out and checked this all out over the weekend, you get some great sight distance, because basically both drivers could see each other at that point figure out who's going to go and who's not. That was my first comment. My second comment was, it looks like if we got rid of a bunch of the vegetation, some of which the town happens to own, we could certainly improve some of the sight distances across the short piece. And putting stop signs on the short piece would make sense to me, because you would want to make sure that people are not coming up or going down either of those two hills.
So I think if you could increase this, if you could gain appropriate sight distance coming here, as you just said, the stops on the short leg on both sides are my baseline. Those need to be in just for basic traffic control. If you could get and maintain a sight line for oncoming traffic, you would not necessarily need to stop these two approaches at Kenilworth. Now, the reason we put the stop on Waverly here is because we already stopped Kenilworth once. So we're going to let Kenilworth then be the through route to continue on Kenilworth. But if Kenilworth was not stopped up here because you increased the sight line, you could do these two. And then, as you said, put one down here. You would need to make a clear space for probably the vehicles down here to not park, but you could have the stop sign down here and have Waverly running free flow in both directions. So I think that would be a fair compromise if you could maintain that sight line going up Kenilworth. And you would definitely want to stop, but you would want to also stripe a stop bar, like the white bar on the pavement coming through here, just so that people know where they're supposed to stop if they miss the stop sign, that type of thing, as they're looking to the left.
For sure. And
yeah.
I was thinking of it across where the current yield sign is, but closer to that driveway, because that way both cars would stop across from each other. But maybe there's a reason for not doing that.
Yeah, generally wouldn't want the stop to place a car in front of a driveway, but if you get away from that, that would be great.
It would be behind the driveway, so it'd be where the yield sign is, but just move it slightly.
I see. Yeah. The issue there is you're getting a little far away from the actual intersection itself. You have a gap, and then by the time you get going, somebody comes around the corner, if you will. Generally, you want to be closer to kind of where the edge of if you imagine an imaginary line coming around that corner, you want to be as close to that as possible. And this looks like it'd be about 100 feet back from there almost. So you really want the stop to be occurring out here so that the person could see straight up the road.
Okay.
Rather than trying to look over across here, because there is the large tree that's in that island.
Mm-hmm.
That could block that back view going across.
And would it make sense to put some dots in to indicate the road continues, Waverly kind of merges there, or vice versa?
Oh yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing as you were saying. That is, you could do, we call them puppy tracks. You could almost stripe the continuation of the road, if you will, around that corner. So it's very clear what the through route is going through. There's ways to do that. It would almost look like a roundabout entrance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Steve.
I guess, especially like the last part of that conversation, I feel like that could be one of the ways to help it, is to get those sort of dash lines that define whatever street's going to be the through versus the other. But I'm kind of similar vein as Phil, that would like to see just like one side with a stop versus 5 stop signs. And I'm not sure that the yield really makes as much sense to me there. Apologies for dropping so many photos and maps into the town. I'm going to just put one more in. So the historic plan of the town is pretty important, I think, to me and many others. Like, I served for many years with Perry Chapman on the Historic Preservation Committee, and that triangle was one of the original parts of the plan. And I put in a photo in the chat earlier. It's kind of, this town was 1880s plan that came like 20 years after Riverside in Illinois. I noticed there, I was just curious, I just looked to see if they had a lot of stop signs and yield signs, and it doesn't seem like they do. But the big difference I noticed there is we have a lot of understory vegetation around these intersections, and they don't seem to. it seems to make a big difference. I wonder if maybe that's the way to do it, is just try to minimally stripe and sign this intersection and do something to kind of improve visibility. Just my thoughts.
Steve, I'm looking at that. It doesn't have that cut through. So from an historic perspective, if we were to get rid of that cut through from one street to the other and just not allow right turns on southbound Waverly, that would be a non-historic thing or non-historic offending thing. No? You're muted.
The triangle is shown there, sticking outside the intersection, and it was the same at other ones that have in town that have the triangle, like over at Claremont and Montrose. So it was a little bit offending to me a couple of years ago when that triangle was just moved. It was actually moved further away from the town's original plan for not a real benefit at the time. So I'd hate to see the town's plan kind of be, morphed again, just without fully thinking that through.
I apologize. I didn't look at it closely. I see what you're saying. I was looking at the wrong thing. Okay. I apologize.
One other thing I forgot to mention with my comments before is since that little cut through in the back is so little used, if the vegetation maybe could be cut away some, so then the view is better through there. I wonder if maybe instead of just having asphalt paving there, maybe that just becomes cobblestone or something else that slows the cars down. People really think about it of those rare times that they cut through there. Then you would just keep asphalt on the other streets. They're more of the through streets. I feel like that wouldn't be discongruous with the town plan, but maybe that helps us a little bit just to, stop a delivery truck from making that turn at 25 miles an hour.
All right. Any other comments from council members? The time it's 9:02, so this is taking a lot longer than we expected because there's so much good information that we need to ask and hear. But I do want to keep moving. So I'd like to move on to the next task, please.
Absolutely. So we'll move just up the street to Argyle Avenue and Kenworth Avenue. Here we have a more traditional T intersection. Argyle is coming up at grade, and we have sort of that similar situation to the south where we have really restricted sight lines coming around the corner, looking up Kenilworth, and there are no stop signs on any of the approaches at this intersection. Now we can see here on the traffic volumes, we have a fair amount of left turns in comparison to the through traffic, and then right turns onto Argyle. So essentially the demand to go from Kenilworth to Argyle and continue Kenilworth to Kenilworth are about equal. There's no real road here that is the predominant roadway. The demand is really shared between both of them. So without any control, right away may not be readily apparent coming into this, but really the limiting factor is the lack of sight distance coming around the corner and the fact that you're coming up at grade, so that further increases sight distance issues. So at a bare minimum, our recommendation on this is to stop Argyle. The perpendicular approach of the T would be the traditional place to stop an intersection. If you don't need always stop control, you at least stop the T. Very rarely do you see the through route stop. Sometimes you see it, let's say at the entrance to a shopping mall or a shopping center. You may stop the side approaches so that you can clear everybody off of the perpendicular approach so as to not back up, say, into the road before it. This obviously isn't that type of situation. So the place to stop sign would be on the perpendicular approach. Now we're into the same situation that we recommended to the south, where you can't see the cars coming up Kenilworth. And so if you really wanted to improve the control of this and slow traffic on these streets, would be to stop the approaches of Kenilworth. Now, I will say is if we're going to go back to that meeting in the middle, the minimally invasive approach, it would be to at least stop Argyle so that you have control of one approach of the intersection so that people can come to a stop and then make their decision of what they're doing. And people not familiar with the area will come into a situation where they are familiar with from just driving in general.
So
Now, we
we've
did
had stop signs there in the past. And the problem is where to put it, because you have to come so close to the intersection to be able to see that a stop sign any further down Argyle isn't going to allow you to be able to see anything. So this is this one's not as simple as just adding a stop sign, because it's
So there are other, and we could look into, there are other ways when we have difficulty placing a stop sign, how to sort of add stop control. One additional thing that could be done here, this is sort of another long-term potential improvement. You could do this. This could be done either by physically extending curbs or just even via striping, is to sort of more frame this intersection in, so that cars know to come up to this point right here and separate themselves from the edge of the road, so that they actually can see around that corner. Because what people do now, right, is they just hug the corner, they come in, and then it's even more difficult to see up the road. So you can just use striping to sort of frame in a more traditional tighter T, so that the driver is out here rather than all the way up almost at the edge of the road trying to look around the bamboo that's out there. So that would be, if it's just striping, it would be somewhat minimally invasive, if you will, for an improvement. Stripe it, you could put in, you have a stop bar. Those things alone are evident that there's a stop, obviously. There could be a situation where a stop sign could be placed. Really don't usually do it on the other side of the street facing that. That's not really recommended. It's really traditionally supposed to be right at your right-hand side as you approach, but understandably, this is a difficult one. With the driveway that comes in at the corner, which is about the worst place that a driveway can come into an intersection.
Bill, please.
So first of all, thanks for confirming my suggestion, because I had actually come up with basically the same suggestions that you just presented, including putting some striping in there to try and push people away from that corner, so not hugging that corner. And I didn't get a chance to get the pictures onto this computer to share them, but I will send them out to everybody. I actually stopped. I did some looking, and if you put the stop signs where, especially the ones that are going towards Strathmore, if you put that one there and you put the other one by the drain, you can easily see the car, because you'll see a picture right parked my car right where the stop sign would be, right where the stop line would be, and you can't miss that car, and you wouldn't be able to miss the other one. So I would think that with a little bit of improvement on sight distance, coupled with some quick striping there to make people know that they're supposed to stay away from that edge, that this thing might actually work pretty good.
And I agree. And the space that needs to be cleared, if you will, if you just wanted to stop the Argyle approach, appears to all be within the town right-of-way line, and well within too. So there's room to spare there. So that stuff could be cleared to improve that set line. And then it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to stop Kenilworth at that approach if you can see up the road. It's just, so if you don't have the sight distance, then a recommendation is always going to be to stop it for safety. But if you gain the sight line, then you could go back to just a more traditional two-way stop on just the side for the perpendicular code.
Right. Steve.
Yeah, just brought this up a couple years ago when we were looking at a sidewalk in this area, which got killed off at the last minute. But the original town plan, if you're coming north on Kenworth, originally it bent slightly left and then bent slightly right. So it was a pretty smooth kind of S-curve through there. I think it was really just meant to be more picturesque, and then Argyle came in a little bit differently, a little bit more square like a traditional stop sign might be. So I would wonder if it's worth looking at in the long term, trying to put that whole intersection back to something closer to what the original plan was, improving the sight lines and the appearance and safety all together with that. It might help with a bunch of things. It's a really difficult intersection to stop. I stop all the time whenever the rare times I do go over there and go up Argyle, I just assume there's a stop sign there because it's a spot like where you would expect a stop sign. I think somebody said before that you would put a yield sign on there, which is kind of, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that at that kind of intersection, but it's a tough intersection. You sit on the hill, there's always cars parked across the street. So, and then you can't see to the right. So you kind of have to time it and then inch forward, and then hope you don't have to jam on the brakes for a car coming down, flying off from your right if you're trying to make a left on Argyle. So I think this is a really problematic intersection. I'm glad I live on the east end of town. I don't have to go over there that much and go up that intersection because it is pretty bad. But I would suggest something that's more of a long range, do it right kind of a plan rather than continuing this kind of degradation of the town's original plan is what we have. I think it was just a matter of when the town maintenance staff decades ago, when they were paving that road, they just kind of inadvertently smoothed it out on Kenilworth. And I think it would help with a bunch of things if you kind of put it back to what it was.
Right.
And to add to that, if you were going to do something more long range, this driveway, since all of this portion is within the public right of way, this driveway could be that could be bent out into the road. This could all be usable space, and you could have a traditional stop sign at your corner out here, if you will, placed where it could be placed. Now that wouldn't be interfering with the driveway. And that would be being a gravel driveway, it'd be relatively, not that big of a modification.
No, and even if you do, and as an alternate, even to striping that area to try to guide cars out further in the intersection, could even be just kind of stonework like you would do on a roundabout. So it might look kind of nice and keep the cars kind of steered out more to the middle. I would suggest doing a more holistic view of this whole intersection here. Just kind of go back to making our town look better while we're doing the safety.
All right. Any other questions for Will before we move on? All right. Thank you so much, Will. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And anything else you guys can have questions, I'm always available.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before the presentation, this was just a listen and clarify things. I would like to ask council members to direct any additional information, questions, anything you want to, we're not going to have time to continue this conversation now, and this is probably going to get pushed a little bit for other things, but we want to make sure that we're keeping the conversation moving. So if you have questions, if you could please send those to Barb, that would be great. The time is 9:13 and we're ready for the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I will keep things moving as best I can, given how late it's gotten. I'd like to touch on first on the preliminary financial report for the month of June. So this is obviously the year end for fiscal year 2023. I do want to note this is a preliminary report. We do expect to get some additional investment earnings notifications very soon. And I'm also aware of some invoices that haven't yet been received. So with that in mind, preliminary FY 2023 revenues are exceeding the budgeted amount at this point in time by roughly $221,000. The major reason for that is income tax receipts, which account for approximately 63% of that variance. As we've talked about on numerous occasions, there were a number of things during the pandemic that have impacted, according to the state, the timing of receipts. Those include filing extension deadlines, a general lack of enforcement. To kind of put the roughly $640,000. We've received an income tax in perspective. When I look back at fiscal years 2019 through fiscal year 2022, we had a range of anywhere from 467,000 to about 532,000. So clearly, what we're seeing this year does not match in any way, shape, or form what we have seen in recent years. Some other revenue areas where we saw some increases over budget include real property tax revenue, investment earnings, as I've already mentioned. And also, as we talked about at your last meeting, we did get an unanticipated payment in other receipts, which was part of a class action settlement. So those are some of the contributing factors on the revenue side. On the expense side, at this point in time, operating expenses are roughly $176,000 under the budgeted amount. A considerable portion of that, about 24%, is represented by unexpended contingency funds. As we've also seen some savings in overall personnel costs, kind of two reasons for that. As you all know, we have a staff member who transitioned from full-time to part-time on a trial basis, which impacted several of the personnel line items. And also we had an extremely mild winter, so our maintenance staff basically never had to really go out and plow snow. Some other areas where we're seeing some savings is some of our IT operations account line item. We're also seeing some savings in our trees, parks, and grounds, which is account number 13.5. Had been very hopeful, perhaps foolishly so, that we would actually get our memorandum of understanding done with the state that would have allowed pruning on Strathmore. We're now at the 6-month mark and counting. They had given me a time frame of 3 to 6 months, so I checked in with them last week, and hopefully that will be resolved soon. One last item under the expenditure line item. Obviously, you all know that we launched a pilot program on May 1st for household organic waste or composting. That program, when we budgeted, was anticipated to start a little sooner in the fiscal year. Some other items, just to kind of wrap up, you'll notice in the reserve fund summary that we do have some items that are showing up for the first time. We have talked about these before, but one is our highway user revenues. These funds, use of these funds is highly restricted by state law. We did not have any eligible project during fiscal year 2023. So by state law, those funds need to actually be shown as reserved. And there will be a report that I will be doing at the end of this calendar year that shows that we've actually reserved the funds because they were not expended. We do have some time to use them. You can reserve funds for up to 10 years before they have to be used. You'll also see in the reserve summary that we had some unexpended capital funds. These are called PEG funds, which is public education and governmental funds. These funds are derived from the county's franchise agreement to which we are a party with Verizon. These funds are also restricted in use. We did have some eligible expenses, specifically the equipment we purchased to hold hybrid meetings, but we did have some additional funds left over. So similar to highway user, they need to be restricted to make sure they're used appropriately. Kind of the bottom line on the financial report is we had assumed a carryover from FY 2023 to 2024 of 136,000 based on where things stand right now. We're sitting at about 332,000. So obviously there may be some shifts in that number before the audit is concluded. As you always have done, you'll have the opportunity at the mid-year budget adjustment to decide how you want to allocate those additional funds. Just kind of wrapping up, we did launch our new website approximately a week ago. We are currently in the process of building the online system for town hall reservations and permit applications. Until that process is complete, we are asking residents to contact the town office for assistance, including any necessary forms that need to be completed, and want to in advance thank everybody for their patience as we're kind of working to get the website fully operational. Two last items. One is our pilot program with Compost Crew. Kind of an update. We have 68 households that have enrolled in the pilot program to date. Enrollment is ongoing. So for any residents who are on this call who are not currently participating, you can sign up at www.compostcrew.com. And lastly, just want to give a shout out to our maintenance team, which is doing a stellar job of kind of mowing and weeding and keeping our trees and flowers well watered this time of year. So that kind of concludes my manager's report, unless you all have any questions.
Good. Just a quick question. What was the unanticipated payment from of 17 grand, give or take?
It was basically a class action settlement that was filed by Baltimore City and among others. It had to do with, it was against Monsanto. There's more specific information, Phil, that was in my report last month. I can send that to you if you'd like. Shoot that paragraph.
Triggered my brain. I forgot. Yep, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So we were not a direct party, but we're on the permit, and that's how we came to get the funds. Any questions from anybody else?
Great, then let's move on. Time is 9:20. Moving on to action items, we've got the introduction of ordinance 2023-3. Reminder that ordinances need a holdover time, so we are introducing today with the hope of voting on it next month.
Okay.
Oh no, I'm sorry, in September.
It'll be in September, right? So
Right,
just
and
briefly, you all have talked about this item on a number of occasions, so I will be brief. Back in the spring of 2022, Rob Pratt approached the town about his family's interest in donating a property parcel in the 4700 block of Argyle, commonly referred to as the Grotto property. I know all of you know where that's at. You all have discussed this matter on a number of occasions, and that's what's kind of brought us here tonight. The ordinance that is before you for possible introduction provides for the acceptance of a gift deed for the entirety of the Grotto property. I do want to call your attention specifically to the full whereas clause on page 2 of the ordinance. This section, this whereas clause, basically reflects the covenants that would be part of the gift deed that the mayor would be signing, assuming this ordinance gets adopted. You all had the opportunity to talk about this earlier, but in a nutshell, the town would be accepting the entirety of the Grotto parcel initially. The Pratt family has agreed that if the town desires at some future date, the back portion of the property, meaning the one that does not include the stone grotto, could be sold off by the town to the adjacent neighbors. The part that contains the grotto would need to remain in town ownership in perpetuity. Another covenant that would be reflected in the gift deed, once again, if this ordinance is eventually adopted, there can be no buildings, no structures that could be ever put on the property, whether it is on town ownership or in adjacent neighbor ownership. And basically those buildings would include anything like an accessory dwelling unit, a garage, a shed. The Pratt family would be fine with the installation of a bench, some kind of landscaping, hardscape, a badminton court, or any other kind of low impact structure. So those would essentially be the nutshell of the covenants that would be reflected in the gift deed.
all right, any questions, or can we get a motion to introduce this?
I'll move that we introduce this ordinance. I just have to get the right number. Ordinance number 2023-3, ordinance to accept a gift deed for the quote unquote grotto lot, part of lot 27 Argyle Avenue.
All right, is there a second?
Second the motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Sounded like a lot of ayes. I want to point out that, oh, Todd, were you able to?
Yes.
Oh,
Aye.
there's your voice. Okay, thank you. A point of clarification on this, because it's an ordinance, we will be eligible to take ownership of this in early October. If we keep on this timeline of approving it in September, approving the ordinance in September, and then it would need a 21-day, I believe it's 21-day holdover, Barb.
Right,
before
so
it would be effective.
right, which would take it into early October before closing could take place.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let's see, moving on to an introduction of another ordinance. Town Manager Matthews.
Sure. So this is proposed ordinance number 2023-4, which would, upon adoption, amend Chapter 12 of the Town Code, which relates to wireless telecommunication facilities in the public rights of way. Just kind of a brief history. In September 2018, the Federal Communications Commission issued an order imposing limits on what regulations can be enforced by local governments concerning wireless telecommunications infrastructure in the public rights of way. This order was in response to complaints that had been filed from wireless companies who argued that local government regulations were unduly burdensome. The order that was issued by the FCC did allow local governments to regulate certain things, including aesthetic standards to prevent clutter, but basically required that any such regulations generally need to be published in advance. So back in January of 2019, the Town Council adopted ordinance number 2019-3 so that there would be some published standards on the books. My understanding from the town attorney, as was noted at that time, when ordinance number 2019-3 was adopted, the town's ordinance would eventually need to be revisited once there was a resolution to some national litigation concerning the order. And there were also some actions undertaken by Montgomery County. Those major litigation efforts have concluded. The state of Maryland has not preempted local law despite industry lobbying, and the county has also updated its regulations. In discussing this matter with Town Attorney Ron Bolt, he and I discussed some work that had been done by a Town of Chevy Chase committee. They had recently reviewed their municipal ordinance and those of other jurisdictions around the country, utilizing the services of Tim Lay. He is a well-known telecommunications lawyer in this area. We also used him where I previously worked. So Mr. Lay did work with the Town of Chevy Chase. And basically the ordinance that is before you this evening for introduction is largely modeled after that Town of Chevy Chase ordinance. I think I'm hearing somebody. I'm going to mute. I think that may be Todd at the airport. So the key provisions of the ordinance that is before you this evening, the significant edits would be to reduce the allowable equipment box size from 28 to 12 feet, which is less than what the order allows, but conforms to the county standards. The county did share that they have gotten some pushback from the telecommunications industry, but they've always been able to work around it. It would change the setback between facilities owned by the same operator from 1,000 to 500 feet. This was recommended by Mr. Lay, who once again is Telecommunications Counsel. It would require companies to provide a 2-year deployment plan so the town can assess what is coming down the road and be able to respond accordingly. It would disallow the pruning of trees except as minimally reasonably necessary. It would require replaced poles to be removed within 180 days. It would require noise abatement for any cooling fans that were required by the equipment. It would require each of the companies who had facilities in Garrett Park to annually certify whether those facilities are still being actively used. And if not, so we can require them to be removed, and it would add a provision for variance request. I also wanted to note that in your agenda packet is a draft right-of-way access agreement that was drafted by the town attorney. This requirement is allowed by the FCC order, and one had not been drafted previously, so Mr. Bolt did provide me with one to include within this agenda item. The proposed right-of-way access agreement that's included in your agenda packet is derived from a City of Gaithersburg agreement, which has also been reviewed by telecommunications attorney Mr. Lay. It addresses such things as insurance, indemnity, repair of damage, inspections, removal of unneeded equipment. So with that, I will open it up to any questions. This is obviously a fairly technical matter, so I'm not going to say that I can answer each and every question that you have. I may need to go back to Mr. Bolt for his guidance and share that information with you if this ordinance comes back for adoption.
Yeah, Barb, is it possible to get a picture of what this thing looks like these towers and the equipment and the fans and the,
sure,
I just seems like it's a lot of equipment and it seems like it's pretty substantial. And I just don't know visually what it's going to look like on the streetscape of our town.
Sure, I'll see. They're going to vary, Lisa, from telecommunications company to telecommunications company, but I can certainly probably find some examples from some other jurisdictions and share those with you all.
Thank you.
Jerry?
I was wondering whether you and the other town staff have considered what sort of implementation mechanisms we might need to put in place in terms of, for example, posting on our website where 5G antennas are being placed or are being proposed. Montgomery County has a pretty good interactive map that while the applications are pending, you can see where they are and what's pending. So I was just wondering about that.
We have not yet discussed that, but I appreciate you bringing up the information on the county website, and I'll take a look at that and see what we can do. Phil?
Okay, so just quick to that point, you were required by the at the very least by the last piece whose name I just forgot, but the right to enter facilities, right-of-way use and franchise agreements. You're required by that to show all the current facilities along with all the future facilities up to 24 months out that company plans to put into Garrett Park.
That's correct.
So I would think that if we can post that piece, why it would probably just do the trick.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Phil.
A couple of questions for you, which I know you won't be able to answer, but I'll call it page 6, and it's actually section 121 definitions, but it's on the next page. The last definition is number 5. Facility does not result in human exposure. Under applicable safety standards under federal law, is there a way to get that changed to say under the latest federal law? Because we don't know when they may or may not change it, and it would be nice that they're up to date.
Yeah, I can certainly check with the town attorney who drafted the ordinance and see if he has any concerns, Phil.
Yeah, because I mean, if we could do that, because I know a lot of people are going to be concerned about the emissions of these things, and so if we could do that, it would work great.
Okay.
The franchise agreement, which would be it's like the 18th page if you were to page in from the beginning. There is a maximum permissible exposure report, and about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences down, there's a typo in there. It says Part TI, companies, facilities. Not 100% sure what that means.
Okay.
Emergency contact information, which is a chunk below it, 6.8. I would suggest that we add something that the contact information be updated. I don't know, I'll call it quarterly for lack of better words. But you know, because they could just send us the same piece of paper every time, but just so we're up to date in case we need something, we're not trying to call numbers that are hopelessly outdated.
Okay.
Going to the next page, number 10, 10.1 to talk about insurance. And my question there was, does the town need to be named as additional insured on that policy, or should it be? It was something I learned a long time ago.
Yeah, we certainly do. I'll just give you an example, like for the demolition contract for Yendel, that's certainly a requirement for most of our construction contracts. I will check with the local government insurance trust, Phil, to see if they have a recommendation for that in this particular context.
Right. Like maybe I could just throw it at the bottom of that paragraph, whatever it was. And right now, only last thing is on the very last page where we're doing the comparisons, town of Garrett Park. Second box on the right, I think there's a typo because it talks about 1,000 feet from other towers, but I think we changed that to be 500 feet from other towers.
Oh, these are actually what the current standards are. I'm sorry if that was not clear. These are the current county standards and the current town standards.
My mistake. Okay.
No problem.
Sorry about
No problem.
That was it for me. Do we need to introduce this, I guess?
If you all are so inclined, that would be great.
I do have one more question, if I may, before we introduce.
Sure, of course.
So we do give design standards, but in your conversations with the attorney, do you think we could add anything to the effect of, because we are a historic community, some sort of 30-day approval process for a depiction of the design?
What I can ask Ron Bolt whether or not, I mean, certainly the intent of the order was to give towns the ability to have some regulation regarding that. I'm not sure how far that can go, but I'll ask around that.
Right. I mean, I understand we can't deny access and we can't create regulations that would effectively deny
Right.
access, but I wondered, given our concern about the presentation of the town and how these might affect that. The other question, I can't find it now, but somewhere I think we indicate that a provider may apply for up to 5 facilities at a time or something to that effect. Do we have any kind of technical indications of, given the area of the town, how many per provider might be appropriate for the
Reasonable
size of our town?
Yeah, that may actually be a question, and you know, it may actually be helpful for the town, perhaps, and I'll discuss it with Ron Bolt, of course, but it may be helpful for us to reach out to Tim Lay directly on some of these questions, because he's probably the person who's best able or best positioned to answer them. So if you all are okay with that, obviously, you know, there would be some cost involved, but and I'll talk to Ron first to see if he has a good handle on that. Is your thought,
I think that would be
Jared?
helpful to know. I don't have a problem with introducing it with the understanding that if we get feedback that we could amend it upon for actually.
Yeah, I think this is going to come down to, does federal law allow us to limit how many facilities a particular carrier can have? And not being a lawyer, I'm not even going to venture into that territory.
Totally understand that. I just wanted to understand that because we do cover a pretty small area, and depending upon how many providers, that could add up to a lot.
100% correct. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Hopefully you
No
can
more
steer us
questions
some.
from me.
I'm sorry, Stephen.
I'm sorry.
I was just piggybacking on what Jerry Lee was saying. Hopefully, at least asking the question could spur some reasonable planning, because you probably could
Right.
serve Randolph Hills and Garrett Park just by cell towers over by the train station, across the train tracks, even in the trees there. So you wouldn't want to have them, like 5 of them in Garrett Park and none in Randolph Hills. So
Yeah. Any other questions?
All right. We get a motion to introduce this?
Yes,
I'll
I
be
moved.
happy.
Oh,
Go ahead. Or do you want me to, since you're in the airport?
go ahead, please. Sorry.
Okay. I move to introduce proposed ordinance number 2023-4.
Don, would you like, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Second.
Okay.
Can I make maybe a minor amendment to that? And that is that we're going to also, unless it's part of the ordinance, I believe there's a small wireless facilities right-of-way use and franchise agreement. Is this going to be part of the ordinance, or do we vote on it separately?
I'm sorry, Phil, could you repeat the question?
So we've got the ordinance, right?
Right.
And then at the end of it, we've got the small wireless facilities right-of-way use and franchise agreement, which appears to be almost a separate document because it's after the signature page of the ordinance that we just introduced. Do we tack that on as so it's all one thing, or we do another vote for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying, Phil. I would say that you probably vote on the ordinance itself, and then, you know, if you want to have a motion to say that you're supportive of the draft right-of-way agreement, but I don't believe the two are linked. I mean, they're linked, but not formally. One's a code amendment.
Okay.
I don't think it really
Thank
matters
you.
either way. If it's easier just to combine it in one motion, I think that's fine.
Well, that does raise a different issue because I thought it was incorporated by reference. Perhaps it's not.
Yeah,
Because it doesn't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Geraldine.
Because the proposed draft agreement
Actually, you're correct.
includes, fines and application fees, and I was assuming that was part and parcel to what we were introducing.
Actually, there is a reference to the right-of-way access agreement. I just randomly picked a page. So yes, I would, I think they're a little bit part and parcel. So if you want to include in your motion that you're really endorsing both.
Okay, is everybody comfortable with that plan?
That's my suggestion.
Yes.
Oh, all right, so I'll try again.
Sorry about that.
I move to introduce proposed ordinance number 2023-4 as amended by Mr. Schultz's recommendations and to incorporate by reference the draft attached right-of-way use and franchise agreement.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's 5. All right, excellent. Time is 9:41, and the next item on the agenda is the permit fee schedule that we have that we introduced last month. Barb.
Yeah, so this resolution would basically formalize the decisions you made at the meeting in June regarding the permit fee schedule. So the information contained in the accompanying chart should not be new to you. I did want to note, we had had some previous discussions about possibly including some of the parking related fines in the fee resolution. I can provide you more information later, but suffice to say that the more I dug into the issue, the more it became clear that we have some foundational work to do before you can adopt those fees formally. So that is why the permit fees only are before you this evening.
Any concerns about these, about this fee schedule, or can we move on to the vote?
My concern about, my concern that I think I raised in the last when we went over this is, I think the cost of the staff time and the administrative cost to impose a $25 fee for solar panels, and I think swimming pools just seemed like not worth the effort. So I don't know that we need, I mean, my suggestion would be to not charge a $25 permit fee for those things. Just seems like it's not worth the effort.
I'd like to offer a counterpoint at least on the swimming pools. I think it's beneficial for the town to have a process to review swimming pools because they generally create a lot of impervious, not permeable space. And while it is on private property and allowed, I do think that that's something that the town should be keeping track of and be able to reference and keep data on to consider if we want to, in this current era of climate change and given all the issues that we are already aware of with the watershed and impacts here with being so close to Rock Creek Park, of having so many impermeable surfaces in town, I think it's useful to put a permit process for swimming pools at a minimum.
Okay, Todd has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. I tend to agree with Lisa, as I raised at the last meeting regarding low-cost permits. But what I think we should do with regard to swimming pools, given Jerry's valid point, is actually raise it and perhaps cut off the one for solar collectors, which, you know, the whole country is giving rebates for people to install solar collectors. I mean, I just installed them, so I'm not going to benefit from this change. But they do save good, you know, they save electricity. And I think we're acting counter to the national spirit if we charge for solar collectors, especially if, again, as we talked about at the last meeting, charge more money to implement the collection than the actual value of the funds we would get. So I think we should double the swimming pool fee and cut the solar panel fee.
I think, I don't know whether Stephen or Phil had their
Yeah.
hand up first. Stephen, you want to go?
Yeah, but before Todd started, he was saying similar things, but I was kind of with Jerry Lee too. I feel like the pool is an important one to have a fee for, beyond impervious surfaces, which we don't typically review. They do, in some cases, they affect the town trees and the town right away and so on and so forth. So tree protection and construction cuts need to be considered. So I think it's important to keep a fee in there, but I would agree with Todd that maybe just let go on the solar panels form letter. This is probably just going to change the address and just save the step of billing it. I think Lisa said that too. So.
Phil?
So my understanding, well, first of all, I'm fine with swimming pool. If you want to jack up the rate on the swimming pool, I would consider, say, $300 only because it's the cost of building addition, but somebody else can counter me on that one. But the town permit for solar panels and fences, there's two reasons I would say to keep it. One is because somebody has to expend the time and energy to come up with even a form letter to fill it in and send it off to where it needs to go. And we have to do it because that's a part of the requirement. And it also leaves a paper trail, because we've got a paper trail now that somebody paid for said permit, and we can see where that is. So if there's ever a question, there's two ways that we could chase this down. And it forces people to have to come to us and tell us what they're doing. And even especially with fences, because I've seen fences put up without any knowledge of anybody until one day the fence is going up. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Jerry Lee?
Thank you. Yeah, I missed at the beginning the fences portion of this, and I want to agree with Phil on the fences. I think it's useful for the town to potentially be a third party as relates to fence disputes, in addition to the county. In the past, we had to make use of the county and avail ourselves to have the county assist us with the fence dispute issue. I would have much rather to be able to go to my nearby town to seek that assistance. And I just think that that's an important, because it relates to the borders between properties, and in some cases could relate to borders that are on town right of way, and also could affect town trees. That's a really important thing for the town to be permitting. I'm going to recuse myself on the solar panels question.
I didn't realize the fences were in there either, but yeah, that is an important thing. And some of the fences have been reviewed even by the Land Use Advisory Committee, and they pointed out different county codes that residents weren't aware of. So like the heights of fences and where they can stop and start. So
Let's see, Todd?
I just want to come full circle and agree with Phil that we could raise the fee for the pools even higher to something on the order of $300, which I think would be perfectly fair. I do think we should remove the solar part of the solar panels and fences and just leave the fences, in part because I think, as Phil mentioned, it is indeed part of the process to get local approval. And it seems that will happen whether there's a fee or permit required or not. So it seems to me that the concern about tracking them is already covered as it is.
Yeah, if I can just clarify, so for solar panels, other than in the historic district, we have no regulations. The letter is required by the county to basically verify that we're aware of it and that we're okay with the county proceeding to issue a permit if it so chooses, so.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna weigh in one more time. I know I recused myself on the solar panels, but just hypothetically, if we don't have a permit process for solar panels and somebody who lives within the historic district puts them in and doesn't bother to get a historic area work permit, and we don't catch it because we are not requiring a permit, isn't that a problem for us in the
I'm sorry,
historic district?
Yeah, I don't know if you caught part of what I said. If the property is not located within the historic district, we don't regulate it. If they are located within the historic district, there is a required review.
So even if we don't require a separate permit for solar panels, then we would require a review of solar panel installation, but how would we track that if we don't require a permit?
The way that kind of the controlling mechanism is that the county will not process a solar panel permit on their end without a letter from Garrett Park. So that is what the essentially trigger is someone has to come to us to basically get a letter. At that point, we have the address, we know whether it's in the historic district or not. If they are not within the historic district, then the letter simply says the property is not located in the historic district and the town does not regulate the installation of solar panels.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I'm satisfied with that.
Any other concerns, or are we ready to put this to a vote?
I think you can either put it to a vote. I mean, this is for adoption, either as it's presented or someone, well, I guess you need to actually sort of have a motion on the floor before you amend it. I think Todd has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. I would like to propose, first of all, that we raise the swimming pool permit fee to $300, that we drop solar panels from the proposed solar panel and fence part of the fees, and pass the rest of the fee structure as presented. It's a 2-in-1.
Okay.
Trying to pass it all in one if we can.
Has everybody got that?
Yeah, it's a resolution, so you are going to have to ultimately pass it together.
Okay, good. So let's see if we can do it on the first round. Is there a second?
Anybody?
I'll second it, unless you want us to, so it's going to be for resolution 2023 adopting permit fee schedule as amended by Todd.
Right.
And this goes into the ordinance or the schedule? Or?
This would not be codified because resolutions are not codified. It would basically be placed on the website and it would remain in effect until such time as you change the fee, any of the fees.
Okay.
So those in favor of approving the resolution as amended, fee schedule as, oh, I'm sorry, Jerry.
I just realized we just passed the telecommunications ordinance, which included an application fee. These are all permit fees, so that wouldn't be relevant, right? That would be a separate type of fee.
I think it's more of a right of, yeah, I think it's separate. Ron Bolt did not. Ron Bolt did not raise that as an issue, and he was working with me on both of these. So I think these are considered different, is my understanding.
Okay, just wanted to double check before we committed to this particular schedule, since it took so much time to get it to this point.
Okay, so we've got a motion to raise the swimming pool fee to $300 to remove the fee or the solar panel fee from that line item so that we're charging $25 for a permit letter for fences. And that got a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was unanimous. Okay. Wonderful. Right, time is 9:54. Town Manager Matthews, the replacement doors for the post office.
Bet you all are tired of hearing from me. I'll try to move it along. I think as you all are aware, since you come through the post office lobby doors probably on a regular basis, these doors are they're wooden, they're very heavy, they're warped, and they no longer close properly. Basically, part of the problem is just the significant pedestrian traffic that goes in and out of those doors. And the hinges on the doors, because we can't withstand the heavy volume of in and out of traffic. So we have had our town maintenance staff kind of re-secure and strengthen the hinge attachment screws on multiple occasions. We're now at a point that they're no longer repairable because of Penn Place's historic designation. The reason this item has not come before you before now is that I wanted to make sure we could actually get a historic area work permit from the County Historic Preservation Commission. We filed that application. They considered this matter at their meeting on June 14th and basically approved the replacement of the current manual wooden doors with metal doors fitted with an automatic opener. This change would ensure that we have reliable ADA compliant access to the first floor of Penn Place. The proposed metal replacement doors would be visually identical to the existing wood doors. They would be painted to match the existing trim color that we have, for the rest of the building. The handles, the hardware would be identical to that of the existing doors. And basically the fenestration would exactly replicate the existing doors. George Miller has been working on this for some time. Basically, he only found one company that basically could provide doors that are identical, which is certainly something that the County Historic Preservation Commission staff was interested in. That company is Low-Tech LLC, which is located in Elk Ridge, Maryland. They provided a price quote of $36,517 for the purchase, delivery, and installation of the replacement entry doors at the first floor. There may be some residual costs, and just to make you aware of it, it's not what you're voting on this evening, but there may be some additional electric and carpentry work that may be needed. Basically, just to kind of pull out from the price quote, the lead time is estimated at 15 to 17 weeks. From receipt of the approved drawings, we're probably looking at 2 to 3 weeks to actually get the drawing. So it is going to take some time to get the replacement doors. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. I would note that our Historic Preservation Commission had reviewed this matter, obviously, before we went to county HPC. The chair, Nancy Waltz, did provide a letter of endorsement to county HPC staff as part of their consideration of this application.
Any questions, or are we willing to give a thumbs up for this? So this came to us because of the price, the value of it.
Correct.
Right. Yes, please, Phil.
I was gonna say, I'm sorry, but one of the things to make note of is these will now have automatic openers for ADA compliance, right?
Right, that's correct.
So that's, I'm sure, what helped move the price up a bit.
It did.
Also, just want to mention that this change was attempted to be done more quickly when the COVID pandemic first started, to make it easier for people to enter without touch. But because of the supply chain, it was difficult, and all of the other issues, we couldn't do it faster.
Right.
I'm in favor of authorizing.
Thumbs up.
I'll second
I'll
that.
second.
Thumb up.
Okay. Sounds
All
like
right.
everyone in favor.
Sounds great.
Agreed.
Excelente. All right. Ooh, let's see. Next item on the agenda. The time is 9:59. Contract with Lumber and Light. This is also
Okay.
one of those thumbs up kind of situations. Thumbs up,
Yeah.
thumbs down. Don't want to say what it has to be, but
Yeah, so essentially, in September of 2021, the then town council authorized execution of a contract with Lumber and Light to conduct a assessment and develop alternatives for improving the layout and efficiency of the town office. The firm presented its findings to you at a special town council meeting that was held on, I believe it was June 8th of 2022. Basically, back in November, you all had talked about how you wanted to allocate the funding we received under the American Rescue Plan Act, commonly known as ARPA. You decided to allocate funding for two projects, the renovation of the town office and the planned renovation of town hall. Their original contract did include not only the initial phase of work, but the design development phase. That amount was under $10,000. So I executed that proposal. They recently submitted their design development deliverables, and Kayla and I have a meeting with them later this week to go to review those with them. Their original proposal did not include pricing for construction administration and procurement services. I've attached as part of your agenda item the proposal I received from the firm. The pricing is actually less than what you saw in some of the prior budgets. So it's slightly less than what you had seen in previous discussions. At this juncture, I'm recommending that the town council authorize acceptance of the proposal submitted by Lumber and Light for construction administration and procurement, procurement services associated with the renovation of the town office. As the mayor indicated, in part, this is coming to you because the fee doesn't exceed $10,000.
So
But they're gonna put this work out to bid, and then they're gonna supervise the construction of the awards of the contracts.
Yeah, so there's different components. The actual kind of physical construction in the town office is minimal. There's construction of a wall. There's some other actual construction changes. They've been getting pricing on that. That's part of what Kayla and I will be reviewing with them later this week. The design development deliverables also include some recommended furniture selections that they have been researching. And once again, that's part of what we'll be reviewing with them later this week.
I am eager for this to move forward. This is quite the process. So thank you for sticking with this, and look forward to hearing what they have to say, and you know what kind of timeline we can get from this. Yeah, good.
So a couple of quick questions. Is this a firm fixed price or just an estimate? Because I'm kind of confused based on the fact that they have proposed services, but then they've got a fee.
The $14,200 is the fixed fee for the construction administration and procurement, and then the additional added services are things that the council or the town in its discretion could add on, which are done on an hourly rate for the most part.
Okay, so then when they list the construction administration at $150 an hour, that's basically just for information. That's not indicating we're limited to like 100 hours worth of work, or that that this is just an estimate.
Right. I mean, obviously they have a sense at this point of what the scope of work will be based on the prior direction from the mayor and town council in terms of what the scope of work would entail. I did want to share with you all as well. Phil's question kind of prompted me to mention this. Is, if you may recall that there at the time when they presented last year, there was sort of a range of costs. There was sort of a low end and a higher end. We'll know more after Kayla and I have this meeting, but they do feel like based on what they have, what they're recommending and what they've priced out, that things will come in at the lower end of what they had previously presented.
And my understanding is we're gonna make that little front office rented for a third party.
What the direction you all had given and what is anticipated based on that direction is that we commonly refer to it as tenant space B, which is next to Black Market's kind of pantry area. What the direction you all had given previously was that we were to get it to a state that was rentable. So in other words, new flooring, painting, new lighting. And at that point, you all would, once it's suitable for rental, you all would basically make a decision as to whether or not you wanted us to start marketing the space or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Are we giving thumbs up, thumbs down on this?
One more question. So
Yeah.
Barb, to follow on to Phil's questions, are you recommending that we authorize this up to a certain amount? Or how are we addressing the dollar amount that would ultimately be affixed to the contract that we're authorizing?
Sorry, I keep getting updates on something. I would suggest that you authorize the fee up to the not to exceed of 14.2, which is what they included in their proposal.
Okay, but the procurement, is the procurement, it says included, but I was reading that as included in the cost of procured items as opposed to.
They've sort of rolled everything in together, what they expect based on the items that they have spec'd at this time.
Okay, so the 14 plus includes their fee, but not the actual procured items, or does it also include the procured items?
No, we're replacing all the office furniture, so it's certainly going to, this is their fee for.
That's what I thought. So that would be just their fee portion of the procured items.
Right. The only thing that is before you this evening is just the lumber and light fee.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Their oversight of construction.
Correct.
Yeah, because I
So we
understand.
don't have a total amount of money that this project is going to cost the town. Is that correct?
I'd have to look it up, Lisa. There was an amount based on the allocation of the ARPA funds between town hall and the town office. I might actually be able to pull it if you just give me a second, because I think it was actually in the financial report. I believe for budgeting purposes, we picked the high end of the range that Lumber and Light had given. As I mentioned, they believe, and Kayla and I need to look at what they're speccing, but it looks like it will be on the lower end. So if you flip to your financial report and you go to the capital budget page, you will see that there was we have ARPA funds in total of $1,033,924. $802,180 was allocated to town hall. The office renovation was $231,744.
Is that the money that,
I'm sorry?
is that the money that is that it, and the 14.5 for this fee for Lumber and Light is part of that 200 and whatever.
Correct.
That
is correct.
So that's what we're planning to spend on this project.
Correct. And as I said, I believe I can verify this tomorrow because I need to go back through and pull files. I've got too much paper around me right now, but I believe this, the original fee that was in, because I asked Lumber and Light about this specifically, they had originally estimated 16.2 and then they dropped it to 14.2.
But that's just a small part of the project.
It's a very small part of it. That's correct.
Yeah, but I wonder if it's not too high though, because that's like 93 hours for a relatively simple project. Just seems like a lot for this. And normally you don't have construction administration crossing like a couple percent, if not, up to maybe like 5 for project. So that seems to north of 5.
So Barb, is that something that you can put to them on Wednesday? And if you can.
Certainly.
Okay. So, but if we approve the payment with the expectation, with the hope that it would be lower, if you could get it lower.
I can certainly ask them that. They have lowered it from the beginning based on what they were looking at. I can certainly raise that with them.
And worth a try. There's a backstop too, because it does say that it needs the town's authorization to do it, because it's an upset limit. So
correct.
They are a little bit back. They can't just go and do it because they feel like it.
No, I mean that they have to have approval to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, thumbs up. Are we approving this this payment or the paying for these services? Yes.
I'll approve it.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Phil?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, and Todd is
Yes.
still there. Oh my gosh. Okay.
What about Todd's pilot?
All right, thank you very much. Time is 10:09. The playground structure. So we're not having some big conversation about what to do with anything on Cambria, other than we need to take some action of some sort to have this space be safe for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will just jump in very quickly. So I think everyone is aware that we had a problem with a resident in late March on a Sunday night brought to my attention that the plastic on the spiral slide had separated. A child had been cut as a result. We then basically restricted access to the slide. We attempted using yellow caution tape. Let's just say that kept getting ripped down. Eventually I asked George Miller to basically put some kind of temporary obstruction at the very top of the slide, which is sort of a wood block.
But when I walk by there, the kids go up backwards and then
Oh,
they
dear.
slide. So they're in front of the part that's separated anyways. We haven't really accomplished anything with that. So
Yeah.
just,
So
so that's what's happened.
Yeah,
So we
hence the
need to
mayor's-
replace it.
Hence the mayor's comment, we need to do something more permanently. So I've had a number of discussions with Playground Specialist Inc. They were the supplier of the play structure. They are not the manufacturer. That is Play World Systems. So basically the spiral slide is no longer under warranty, as we've talked about before. Parts are no longer available to repair it in a manner that would meet technical specifications. So at this point, I guess a couple options to present to you all. One is, and we've talked about this before, is to essentially purchase a new spiral slide, which I have a proposal that if it's accepted within a certain period of time, has a cost of $10,959. I also had some discussions with Playground Specialist about, any other option that they could consider, because obviously this play structure is approaching 14 years. They generally have a life of 15 to 20. So I do think part of your consideration is how much money do you want to put into a structure that is in the latter stages of its life, for sure. They identified something called a ribbon climber. There is a picture or graphic of that in your agenda packet. The ribbon climber has a cost of $3,551. This includes obviously, removing the spiral slide and disposing of it. The other option, would be to essentially just remove the spiral slide in its entirety. Obviously, there would need to be kind of a safety barrier decking, which would have a cost of $2,250. Because as Lisa noted, our temporary measures are not working to keep people from using the slide. So these are three of the alternatives. Obviously, this is not something we had anticipated occurring, so we don't have any specific funding allocated in the budget, but certainly there are contingency funds that could be used. And as we talked about at the very beginning, or towards the beginning of the meeting, we are ending fiscal year 2023 undoubtedly with more money than we had anticipated. So I think, just in the interest of keeping it short, that's all I will say. If you were to elect option 1 or 2, which is essentially replacing the compromise component with either a replacement spiral slide or with the ribbon climber, the anticipated installation date is November of 2023. Certainly, if there's anything Playground Specialists could do to expedite it, they will, but they want to just provide a realistic time frame that people could expect.
So what if we go with the with option 3 of just removing it and putting a barrier?
They would
be able to
come
do that
out.
soon?
They would come out very quickly.
Because that would be a plastic barrier of their style, right? I mean, they're
Right.
just coming
Basically,
in.
at the top of the structure, there would be no slide, and there would need to be something to essentially make sure no one falls from where the slide used to be.
There's still a slide on the other side, though, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's kind of the smaller kind of double slide. One of the other options I had discussed with, at one point they had brought up was possibly installing a taller straight slide. For a lot of reasons I don't entirely understand, that was not feasible. It could not be done in a manner that would be safe.
Well, that
Shirley?
playground gets used a lot and little kids really spend a lot of time there. So I would like to replace the slide with the less expensive slide and hope that we get some more years of life out of it as soon as possible.
Lisa, are you saying to replace it with the spiral slide? Because that is essentially a like replacement. So that's roughly the $11,000.
No, I'm talking about the cheaper one that you said it was around $3,000.
Yeah, that's not a slide. It's a ribbon climber.
Okay.
The ladder.
Yeah, it's essentially like a little ladder.
Look at the picture.
Yeah, just want to make sure it's not a slide. It's probably not going to be as fun. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't find in my package a picture of that, so I don't know what
I'm
it
holding
is.
it up right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
go to attachment 3.
Okay, so I see it. I see
Yeah,
it. So
it's a ladder basically.
Yeah. So the choice is a ladder for around $3,000 or the slide replacement for $11,000. Those,
Yeah, or
that's
just
our
removing
choice.
something altogether. So
Yeah.
I think they
But
tried to find the climber was probably one of the more viable lower cost play structure elements that they could do. I
Right.
think that's why they kind of put it out there as an option.
And
Yeah,
the part like separated plastic would be removed. The part of the slide that's separated would be removed.
They're going to actually, if you go with option 1, which is the new spiral slide, the current slide will be removed in its entirety and replaced with an entirely brand new slide.
What about
Mhm.
option?
Option
So
2.
but with that one,
Any of these options would mean that the existing slide is completely removed, because the concern is, I think once plastic has started separating, it may be indicative that further separation is going to occur at some future point in time.
but if we go with options 1 or 2, would the current stay there until November?
What I talked to them about is that they would like, I think for liability and safety reasons, I think what they would do is likely go ahead, since all the prices include removing and disposing of the existing spiral slide. I think they would go ahead and come out and remove the slide pending receipt of the new piece of equipment, just to avoid the issue that Lisa has highlighted about people just sort of climbing over and around it.
Right.
And then
So good.
install a piece of wood or something until they got,
Well, we've done that, and Lisa's telling me that people are climbing over the wood.
I'm thinking that if you remove and dumpster the original slide,
Mhm.
that you have to install some type of barrier until you replaced it with either the ribbon climber or a brand new slide.
Right.
Or already put it up there, I think, the wood. I'm pretty sure I saw Phil Schultz climbing up that slide the other day. Have to stop that.
I didn't.
I saw it.
Todd has his hand up. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but since Todd's at the airport, I'm going to go ahead and call on him if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope we board any minute, but I just want to say, I think that if it's possible to just pay for the replacement slide, the full price, I just think that's a better idea, because we don't know how long any plans for renovating the entire area will take, or and the other option, the small ladder, doesn't seem, if you're a kid, that just doesn't seem fun. I mean, I don't know, we haven't surveyed, but it just didn't look the same. And it seems that the slide is the centerpiece of the playground. And if you go there, it seems like it's wooded off. But as Lisa pointed out, I mean, that's not a very good fix. So
no, it's not.
Would strongly support the full slide, and then especially if we have a windfall this year that we could use for that would give us 5 years to see what happens next. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good flight,
But my
Todd.
understanding is the new slide won't be installed until November. Is
That's
that
correct.
your understanding?
Yeah, I think they
That's
would.
a long
Yeah, I mean, these are, it takes a while to order everything. As I said, I believe their intention would probably be to come out and go ahead and and remove the slide that's been compromised just to avoid any possible injury to anyone. Stephen, it looks like you had your hand up.
Yeah, it just looks like the rest of that, the whole playground equipment is fairly robust and doesn't look as breakable. It looks like the green slide is the most breakable thing. And if we replace that, it's probably going to be good, for 5+ years. So it might be the good thing to do. If we're going to do anything with the playground, we'd probably end up either doing it down the road or enhancing what's there.
Okay, so you're okay with the slides, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm kind of in support of just doing the slides so the kids can use that.
Hey, I'm sorry, one question. If we go off, if we have the equipment longer than they guarantee it, is our liability increased?
No, and I think to clarify, when we were having this discussion, when this whole issue first started, I asked them I think one of you had even asked me what was the average life of a play structure, because you were sort of debating whether or not to replace the entire structure. I would say for budgeting purposes, I would say places I've worked, school districts, you also see, generally for budgeting purposes, they do 15 to 20 years. That doesn't mean that you have a drop dead date of 20 years on your structure. And, a lot of it with playgrounds also, we're obviously small and our maintenance staff has a lot of responsibilities. In larger jurisdictions that have staff that can accommodate it, they actually have people who are certified as playground inspectors and they go out and kind of regularly just check on things. And we obviously don't necessarily have that luxury, but I wouldn't necessarily say, Todd, that 15 to 20 year period means that there's a problem with keeping the equipment longer than 20 years. It just means you just need to anticipate that it's towards the end of its life and start planning for its eventual replacement financially.
Yeah, I have to agree with both Stephen on the current condition of the place that is otherwise very good. And if you look at the playground equipment that the town owns at the community center, it's much, much older than this set here at Cambria. And I venture to say it would need to be replaced before this set would. So I'm in complete agreement with Todd that we ought to go for what amounts to, if it only lasted 10 years, $1,000 a year approximately, to give all the kids in town a really enticing and fun slide to play on instead of what looks like a pretty boring ladder.
Not gonna lie, it's not exciting. You can probably kids can climb that furniture in their house and probably have just as much fun, but we did want to give you an option. Phil, I think you had your hand up, I believe.
I did. So I'm going to say I agree wholeheartedly with Todd, Stephen, and Jerry Lee that I think we should replace it in kind. Obviously, we're going to have to wait a little bit to get it, but I think it's going to be great, especially for the kids. And the other thing would be, I still question whether or not we might have some obligation to the state to have to maintain that play structure in some form.
Yeah, actually, I don't want to get too far off topic, just given the time. It appears I contacted the person at the Department of Natural Resources who handles program open space funds. Basically, his review of the records indicates that the town used it to make improvements at Cambria. There were a number of drainage improvements and some work at the ball field. He's not finding any indication that program open space funds were actually used for the play structure itself.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa, I'm guessing that you favor the slide, but I just wanted to confirm that before we move on.
Yes, I agree to replace it with the slide and get it in as soon as possible. That would be mine.
Yep, I will sign the proposal and return it, if not tonight, first thing tomorrow morning, with that direction. So I think we're all good on this item.
Great.
Jerry, did you have your hand up? It looks like.
No, I was clapping.
Oh, okay. Eyes are getting a little wonky as the evening goes on. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Assistant Town Manager Bucher, updated town procurement procedure. I know we're not debating this whole big thing, but wanted to.
We're just going for direction from town council. We are going to try and keep it relatively quick moving. We just need you guys to know what we would like you to give us the okay to talk about with Ron Bolt to make sure that we cover all of our bases. So if you will indulge me for one moment as I switch over to sharing my screen. Can you all more or less see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
So we had originally started this conversation in May of 2023 with a couple of big conversations about dollar thresholds. As we got further into looking at what we have and what other jurisdictions have and talking about best practices, Town Manager Matthews and I found there are a number of areas where we could really be doing better. And this is meant not to become cumbersome, but to protect the town and its financial assets. So we have our statement of purpose. The big one here is really to assure that these supplies, materials, services are all procured efficiently, effectively, and at a price point that works for the town, as well as just to safeguard the quality and integrity. So getting into kind of the broader discussion areas, we're going to talk relatively quickly since you are familiar with the existing procurement guidelines. Please note these are guidelines. They were never properly codified, which is probably the number one thing that we should be looking to do is codify whatever procurement decisions we wind up with. We do have a number of sections that Town Manager Matthews and I think would be appropriate to add. And we have a couple of sections that we'd like to talk about adjusting. And then our next steps are just a review of the timeline. So we have at this point 5 categories in our current procurement guidelines. Some of these will have screenshots, including the initial contracts, as well as the contract awards and signing authority. For the most part, there are some good things in here, but it's not as thorough as it could be. Our current guidelines are 2 pages front and back. That is a little skimpy for some of the purchases the town is required to do. And there are some statements that could be cleared up and made to be more impactful and clearer as we go about getting needed goods and services. Looking at initial contracts, we really have some open-ended areas to fill in. This is really all that Town Manager Matthews and I are given to guide our procurement as we work through it. It doesn't address some of the really key areas, including emergency procurement, sole source procurement, in all of its nuances. So we are going to be talking about that as we get further into it. The other thing I will say is when you look at the competitive procurement current details, there are a handful of bullets on the side of the screen that talk about things it doesn't acknowledge, that it doesn't lay out. There is a dollar threshold at which the state of Maryland requires that we widely distribute RFPs. I believe the language is on eMaryland Marketplace Advantage, commonly referred to as EMMA, or whatever the state may determine the equivalent to be. We also don't have some language that would be really protective of the town, particularly the ability to reject the low bid if the lowest bidder is not a responsible bidder. As has come up in other situations, there are responsive bidders, they give us a sign of interest, and there are responsible of people we would actually trust with doing the work and being paid by town funds. We really want to highlight that we are going to protect our right to pay a little more if it means we have someone who actually has the qualifications. Additionally, while there are some mentions of kind of promoting disadvantaged businesses, we don't go into detail of, does that mean they would receive a higher preference, a higher score if we were to numerically rank bids? I think we should really kind of clear up that language of what we're doing. So that's kind of where we're at currently. Let's go into what we would like to add. And Joanna, I'll ask you if you see hands go up. I can't really see my screen of people right now. So feel free to jump in if people have questions.
Got it.
So emergency procurement is, I would say, the number one thing that I would really like town council to give us authorization to add language about. We don't really have anything that says, here's how you can appropriately, but quickly get needed supplies when there is some high risk extenuating circumstances. We have suggested language on a subsequent slide that does include a timeline for Town Manager Matthews or whoever is in that role to provide notification to council, because we don't want this to turn into a situation where council is caught off guard by emergency procurement. But we also recognize that in a crisis, you can't always be giving minute by minute updates on what we are purchasing. Other government competitive bids. We have had a practice of writing other governments competitively bid contracts. Please see the security cameras that should be installed later this month at Penn Place. but we don't have any language that explicitly calls out our ability to do so. And I believe that would be a good protective measure for town. One of the upcoming things that both Town Manager Matthews and I anticipate happening is potentially change orders, particularly when you are dealing with construction-related projects. You never know what you are going to find at a site that might require an at times abrupt and potentially expensive alteration to what was originally signed as a contract. We don't have any language currently guiding how Town Manager Matthews would be able to get approval, the timeline she would have for working with council to make sure things are done properly. So we should really, ahead of any work at Town Hall or any significant work at Penn Place, start getting some language in order just so that we have something and we're all clear about our expectations. The final one is the really big kind of expectations, and that is adding language about ethics and procurement. While I would hope that everyone involved with town procurement would always, as they have in the past, exercise appropriate discretion and honesty in terms of any relationships they have with contractors, when you don't call out the standards for how they should proceed, if they need to recuse themselves, how to flag a situation, you leave an open door for even the best intentions to be set askew. And I'd like us to really have council's blessing to work with Town Attorney Ron Bolt to add language to really create a standard and make sure that anyone who is doing procurement for the town has clear guidelines. I do see what appears to be a chat bubble question. Thank you, Todd. I can get my slides to move. So you have before you some of these suggested emergency procurement guidelines. Please note, we do have some protective measures so that it's not a complete, the town manager can do whatever they want. This is applicable to procurements over $10,000, which is currently the town manager's signing limit. There is an expectation that it is communicated in writing to the mayor and town council, the nature of the emergency, what was procured, and any other relevant details. As soon as is practical could mean as early as the afternoon after a morning purchase, but we do have an upper limit of not to exceed 3 calendar dates. Please note these are 3 calendar days, not 3 business days. From the date of procurement, Lisa, it looks like you raised your hand.
Yeah, quick question. Do we have a definition of what an emergency situation is and who decides if it's an emergency?
So we have some language on the first paragraph that says that there exists a serious threat to public health, welfare, or safety. And
yeah, but who decides who's making the decision that there's a threat to public health, welfare, or safety? Who's going to I mean, is Barb going to wake up and say there's an emergency, I'm declaring it a serious threat?
So I mean, that's the case. I mean, like if that happens, then we got a bigger problem than her wanting to, buy a helicopter or something.
No, but the question is what's going to trigger and who's going to make the decision that we've got an emergency that needs.
So I think there are a couple of ways that we can approach how we determine who has the authority to trigger an emergency.
Right.
We could look at potentially tying it to a state or county disaster declaration. However,
Correct.
That leaves us open to a vulnerability where we potentially could have a train derailment that maybe has Garrett Park in crisis, but the state of Maryland as a whole might not declare it. Montgomery County might look at where the train went off the rails and say, it's happening in our county, but it's not enough to declare a disaster declaration. I am going to tap in Town Manager Matthews. Do you have any recollection from previous communities you've worked for of any specific thresholds they have tied to of who gets to make that emergency declaration? Is it the manager, the mayor?
It depends on the form of government. So that will, places I've worked, some have been council manager forms of government. Some have been strong mayor, such as, forms of government. I would say, Lisa, and we obviously are just trying to get some sense of support or not. My guess would be that I would probably touch base with the mayor as the chief executive officer of the town and initially discuss the situation with her. I think an example that I can recall from a different community, we've obviously had, during my time in Maryland, several times where we've had extremely significant snowfalls. And, I've worked in communities that even had salt barns where they basically stockpiled it. But there was a point in time in my last position where we were getting hammered so badly. We had exhausted all the supplies in our salt barn. We could no longer tap any salt under the existing contract that we had through SHA. And we were basically out there on the open market attempting to find salt to respond to inclement weather conditions in the town. That's an example of an emergency.
Yeah,
I can think of.
I'm just raising this because I think there should be just a specified definition of an emergency, and then I think your suggestion to talk to the mayor, if the mayor decides that in consultation with you that there's an emergency, then this would go into effect. But I'm just saying, I think that it needs a definition, that's all.
Sure.
Okay, I appreciate that, Councilmember Max. Councilmember Eisenstadt, before we potentially lose you to a plane.
Yeah, no, thanks. I know I've been saying that now for an hour, we're late, but I just think I agree with Lisa that we should codify who decides what entails an emergency, because that is key to the whole procurement process. And it seems that we need clear guidance codified, or at least to see how other communities address that question. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question to kind of council at large now is, two of your members would like, I believe, a specific position named. To my mind, looking at the size of Garrett Park and logic, I would like people's thoughts of, if we tie it to the mayor must be the one to, in writing, acknowledge that it's an emergency for this to go into effect. Would that satisfy people? Is that not a level of control? Would that be a mechanism that council finds appropriate? And I can't tell, Todd and Lisa, if you put your hand up or if you put them down and put them back up. So
sorry. I mean, but I guess just to chime in, I think that's a good one. I think there could be others as well. And that, I guess I would just ask that we also consider that and how to codify what triggers an emergency. First of all, as Lisa said, the definition, and then the process that triggers it.
Yeah.
I think
If I may jump in, and obviously we want to try to get through, as much of this as we can, because I think what Kayla and I were hoping to do was to get at least enough direction that we can take advantage of the August recess. I think the issues you are raising are perfectly valid. I guess what I would like to try to get a sense of is, I guess first and foremost, are you in agreement that our procurement code should be codified? Because that's what this is ultimately all about. But are you okay with having some type of emergency procurement provision be part of that ordinance? We can work out the details based on whatever concerns or issues you all raise. This is obviously going to come back to you. We're just hoping to at least get some starting guidance from you all.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, ditto. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you guys for being patient.
And thank you for the presentation.
We like to make it visual. Councilmember Schultz.
So a couple of things. I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of these things. And I agree with definitely we should try and come up with some way of defining an emergency in the process for doing an emergency. So I'm just wondering, does MML or Gaithersburg or whoever have any type of model code that we could basically use to guide ourselves?
So we actually did look to a couple of different communities to pick up some of their code language to help guide it. So we looked at Rockville, we looked at Westminster, we looked at the village of Chevy Chase, And we have incorporated parts of their guidelines into this presentation. I'd have to look at my notes. I want to say the suggested emergency procurement guidelines that you have here were the ones that I believe came from Rockville, because we found that to be much clearer about what falls under emergency procurement, as well as kind of the clearest guidelines for how whoever makes the procurement can notify council. I'm happy to reach out to MML and see if they have a working emergency definition. I think the biggest question I have for council is, if not the mayor, who has the, pardon this language, but who has the ability to pull the trigger on calling an emergency? Is this something that you feel needs to go to multiple council members? Is this something where you think there's a different protocol?
Kayla, so to answer that particular question, I think we currently have language about how the contingency funds can be accessed, and we could perhaps mirror that language, which requires the mayor to give the council 3 days notice or something like that, or something like that. Anyway, so worth looking at that. I agree that this is a good thing to do, and you can work out the details. But in the meantime, also, I'll send you offline a couple of resources that I'm aware of. I think you might also check with Montgomery County Emergency Management and Maryland Emergency Management. They might have some guidelines that you might find useful.
Thank you, Cheryl. The one thing I just, not to keep us too off track, but I think if we're truly talking about an emergency, at least in my experience, the situations that constitute an emergency would not have lent themselves to giving advance notice, because the kind of by its very nature, an emergency means something that requires an imminent response. So I think we understand, though.
I agree.
What you want, or at least where you're headed.
I'm kind of with
Right.
Terry Lee.
I mean, I understand that, but I think the language there could be mirrored and adjusted for the situation.
Okay, so I think that is something that we can circle back to when we hopefully have a draft ordinance for you all to consider after the August recess. But I am really heartened to hear that everyone is on board with having codified procurement and adding emergency procurement guidelines. So we are going to move into kind of the next.
Just to say one more thing, I think the emergency, if there is an emergency, the mayor agrees, we should be allowed them. I think you should allow your ability to do and take action and make things happen immediately. Like, I don't think there should be any time to ask anybody else. I think if there's an emergency, the mayor says there's an emergency, you should be able to do whatever you think you need to do to address the emergency, is what I'm saying. I think time is of the essence, is my point.
I get that point. Councilmember Eisenstadt, sorry
yeah,
you're late,
I mean,
but happy you're here with us.
I think that the exception would just be if there's an emergency and the mayor is inhabilitated for some reason. I mean, it's conceivable if there's an emergency that it might be necessary to think of some other possibility if the mayor is unable to act in a given moment.
Okay, Todd, thank you. I appreciate, I think we've got the permission that we need to, like we've given the guidance that we can, work out the details later. So appreciate that you all are in support of this. So let's keep going, please.
We're up to change orders. Talking about the projects we have upcoming, while I would hope that we could get through these projects without any potential change orders, I like to pride myself on being somewhat realistic. No one gets through a project without a change order. So going into it with clear guidelines and regulations about who can do what would be important. So there's two types that we identify here. Change orders due to public health, safety, or welfare concern. That could be a change order due to, while I hope this never happens, another public health crisis similar to what we saw with COVID. It could be some other portion of a project that is threatening safety, a building collapse, Barb, if there are any examples you want to chime in with. What we're suggesting as language is that the town manager be given the authorization to execute said change order and then require a prompt notification to council in writing within 3 days. The other kind of questionable area is, would council consider granting authority to the town manager when waiting until the next meeting would incur significant delays in construction? As Barb has referenced in some other presentations, there is a cost associated with mobilizing equipment and personnel, and there's also a cost associated with telling them, actually, you have to stop active work. And I think our concern when we were talking about this is, if we hit a situation where we're 2 weeks out from a council meeting, if Barb doesn't have the authority to authorize a change order, that is 2 weeks where they are not working, but we are still as a community seeing invoices come in, and that could significantly increase project cost. So
I would like,
My comment would be, you have to define a significant, like as a percentage of something. You have to have a threshold, a dollar amount, or a percentage of what would trigger the second guideline.
but in essence, do we support adding language to our procurement procedures to allow a mechanism for making change orders on the fly?
Yes.
The one piece
I
that
have concerns about that, so I think it kind of depends upon how it's worded. I've seen change orders abused in the past, to be perfectly honest, in town.
and I also
Same.
have, and
Yeah.
I was, so one thing I wanted to, if this could also apply to the mayor, so that it's not just the town manager can authorize, but also the mayor, like, I'm not saying so that the mayor can do them, but so that this policy covers and holds accountable anybody who's authorized. I just want that to be covered also. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So
I
this
think
is
it would be
going to
good to have
be,
a record of all those change orders, because I found out about a lot of change orders on a big project well after the fact.
Yeah, I think
so
we're
we
gonna
will
have,
talk.
we'll have to look and just make sure. I guess we'll have to wait and see what the language is, or at least I will, because, a change order could change the direction or impact or nature of the very project that it's attached to. So
Yeah.
we have to be kind of careful of that.
Yeah, and that certainly was not the intent. I think as Kayla and I were talking through this, I can think of a building project that I was involved in with Maryland, that when the contractor started demo, there was actually a hidden column that they needed direction of what to do so that they weren't shut down and we weren't paying general conditions every day until the next meeting. And that was even in a community that met weekly. But we will certainly try to craft the language and try to address some of the concerns that have been raised.
Great. Thank
All we
you.
need to know is where to use caution. So moving on, these areas are probably best practice for us to have, but they are not quite as urgent with upcoming projects as some of the other ones we've talked about. I'm going to close my little tab of folks. Bonding requirements. We currently don't have anything on the books governing when we require bonds, what type we require, and at what threshold. We will talk about that in depth in an upcoming slide, but Barb and I are both in support of having some general standards for bonding put out there, because I don't think there's anything scarier than a project that doesn't have sufficient bonding. The other kind of items we would need to touch on are disposition of goods. We talk a lot in procurement about how we acquire goods, but it's also best practice to have language for how we deal with goods when they are at their end of their life cycle. The current town practice is that if at all possible, we will put it out to auction on a municipal auction site. For the old lawnmower that was replaced a couple of weeks back, that was auctioned off. I don't know if the new person is using it on a smaller facility or if they scrapped it, but it was auctioned off to try and recapture some of the costs incurred by the town for replacing the equipment. We then, of course, have the other side of disposing of goods, worthless items. Sometimes things just have no value. And rather than lose valuable time for our maintenance folks of having them try to get rid of equipment, we just like language that says if it can't be used functionally, we can treat it as waste and dispose of it. Sole source procurement is one that is currently technically referenced in our procurement guidelines, but it lacks clear definitions and it lacks clear structure for where sole source is truly the best and only option. And we'd like to get something added in just that we have guidelines so it's not abused. So looking at the bond security, this language, I believe we potentially tapped from Westminster, basically saying that we would require bid security for construction contracts as those tend to be the highest dollar value projects we'd be working on. We do want to include potential language basically saying at the town manager's discretion, if there's significant risk to another project, we can require bid security. And just kind of put some guidelines for what happens to bid security if there's an issue with the contractor. Some of the other suggested parameters are down here at the bottom. Those we'd suggest having, but if council doesn't care for them, we could remove them with relatively little issue. Looking at what's all before you and knowing that I've been talking a lot, is there kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down? Do you think these kind of boundaries would work for you? Are there areas that we should be tightening up or loosening? Jerry?
I just wanted, when you write up the language about the worthless items for refuse, if you could add some language about making every endeavor to recycle materials if possible.
We can definitely add in language about trying to find a greener option for disposal.
Agreed. I was gonna say the same thing.
And then I'm glad you guys shared. Looking at bid security payment bond, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I actually have no clue really what this means. So, like it's.
I'm fine with it, except the one thing I didn't see was is there going to be a performance bond also?
That I was looking at.
If I may, typically for construction projects, I'm going to use the demolition contract for Yendel. Payment and performance bonds, as well as a bid bond, were requirements. And as part of the RFP, I provided them with a template for their payment and performance bonds. So they are typically, in my experience, required for construction projects.
Good. Yes, I wanted to make sure because yes, I would agree that you should have both.
Okay. Councilmember Bennett, I see your hand went back up.
If you talked about this, I somehow missed it. What do you envision being the need for sales, rentals, or purchases of land and rights of way, and why would we exempt that?
I think you and I are on a different side. Are you looking ahead to?
Oh, perhaps I got ahead of you. I was looking at slide 14.
Okay, we are on slide 12, but I do love that you are considering this independently. It doesn't sound like there's any significant feelings about the thresholds for kind of the bonds or giving language to allow Barb to require bonds for projects beyond the ones we've identified. So I'm ready to move on with this slide unless anyone has a last minute bid bond or other bond comment to offer.
I will definitely agree with the second one, language allowing the rejection of a bid without the appropriate security. I mean, if they can't do that. So anyway, I agree with that for sure should be in there.
We always like language that protects the town's right to choose not to do something. As previously mentioned, our current guidelines do touch upon sole source, but they don't offer a clear definition of when sole source is appropriate and how to actually use it in a way that would not leave open opportunity for abuse. So the language we have here requires that the town manager provide to you in writing information about the process of trying to find other vendors who provide the supply, service, or material, as well as talking about why specifically we cannot go with another option. I sometimes like to give the example of oftentimes for the kind of reinforced trucks that you see used for public works, there can be specialty parts where there really is no better option than the actual branded replacement part made by the manufacturer, even if there are, you know, kind of store brand knockoffs. When you're dealing with heavy equipment in particular, you really want to make sure that you are using something that will hold up to the wear and tear and strain.
Well, also the replacement of the doors at the post office are a really good example of this, is that there's only one source. We got our information about why we had to go with this one vendor and explanation for why that was necessary. So,
yeah. So this would just be putting into the code what you saw for the doors is the expectation and standard for other sole source. So if there are no further comments, questions, or suggestions for sole source, we will move on to the next slide, which is where Jerry had her question. So there are certain exemptions that we encounter as potential unusual situations where competitive procurement, particularly through bidding out a service, is not always the most appropriate or effective way to secure them. Oftentimes, as you will see referenced, it is because there is some sort of personnel or labor cost that is very hard to bid unless you are doing like a seasonal snow removal situation. These kind of guidelines were, I believe, taken from Westminster of what they exempt. These are suggestions. So if council doesn't wish to see certain items included, we can strike that and proceed with developing language that moves on without it.
Jerry, if I may, in response to your question about item number 2, an example that I can think of is assuming that you all end up adopting the ordinance related to the grotto property, and at some point in the future, the portion of the property that doesn't include the grotto structure itself, the town elects to sell land to adjacent property owners. That would be the example that I can think of where number 2 might come into play for Garrett Park.
so we wouldn't be required to
Wouldn't be
see if
required to
anybody
bid
else
it out.
wants it.
Right, because in practical terms, the value of small parcels of property is really going to only have value to someone who owns the adjacent residential lot. Arguably, it's not buildable.
Probably landlocked too.
Correct, exactly.
Well, it seems to me that such a situation of that nature would be so unique that we could deal with it with particular authorization at the time. I'm not in favor of selling that land at this time, but I may not be on the council when it comes up for sale. But I don't agree that it should be made easy to sell off that land, even if it was agreed to by the donating owners.
And you all would certainly have any kind of public property can only be sold or rented with the approval of the legislative body. That's almost a given.
Are there any other comments to this list of, apologies, proposed exemptions? Are folks otherwise comfortable with what is being discussed?
Could you just do a comparison in the process of doing your research of what some other municipality does? Just make sure that these are in line with those. And then we're not missing
I
something.
can definitely come back with another one of my infamous tables of comparisons to towns that aren't Garrett Park.
I don't know about that. I just mean, rather than sole sourcing this piece of information, perhaps a little bit of
We can definitely do some options, and like I said, we can come back with that. This is just get general guidelines and quite frankly, to flag areas of concern or note for council. So we can make sure that when we spend our time developing language and options, we actually have the attention where you all feel it's most needed. So our current procurement doesn't really have a ton of definitions. These are kind of standard common definitions that we would really like to have your blessing to include, just so that everyone is on the same page when I say things like formal procurement versus informal procurement. We feel that's a better way of describing and talking about kind of the informal voice quotes, written quotes that we see currently. This would provide much greater clarity and would ensure that everyone's kind of operating under the same definition of what are we doing here. I'm going to move to the next.
Will these include dollar limits to further define them? Or will the dollar limits be defined elsewhere and then it just comes under the umbrella formal or informal procurement?
So the dollar values will be defined elsewhere. That is actually one of the kind of last slides I have, is just getting council's confirmation of dollar thresholds, where they're at, where they would like to be. So I don't feel that we should call it out in the definition. I feel it's better served having it in a separate section, in part because that makes sure we actually give it some dedicated TLC. I will move us forward to defining a rider contract here. We had talked about earlier in things to add, wanting language allowing the town to ride upon competitively bid contracts. And this definition is really to help guide making sure that we are actually writing an appropriately competitive contract, just because they are somewhat uncommon. I think Barb could probably agree that she's dealing with 10 contracts currently, and only one of them was a rider contract, and that was the cameras at Penn Place. They are not something we are frequently dealing with, but they are something that we should have properly defined.
Agreed. I mean, I think even jurisdictions, I'll think of Rockville, Westminster, Tacoma Park, even a jurisdiction the size of Rockville, which has over 600 employees, looks for rider contracts because it's just such a much more efficient way of procuring goods in a time efficient manner.
We do that with like health insurance for the employees. So
Did that
right.
truck?
I'm sorry, Phil?
Oh, sorry. We did that with a truck too.
Right. A lot of times, like the state has a lot of contracts that you can ride, particularly for vehicles.
So it sounds like everyone's on board with having a definition. We like having the ability to do this. We know there's been value for the town in doing so. So we will move on to the next slide. This is those infamous thresholds that we talked about. So we have currently some history of what the dollar thresholds are, where they came about. And I do have notes from the previous May conversation. What I do want to point out is these are two thresholds, and we're dealing with all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Currently, anything over $10,000 must go before council. It could be $18,000 and not bid out, and it would still have to go before council. Phil, it sounded like you were about to say something, and then I got some weird feedback.
Oh, sorry. No, it wasn't me.
Okay. So what I'm really looking for from council at this moment in time is, do you wish to continue to have a $25,000 threshold to require formal sealed bids? That's staff putting it out on eMaryland Marketplace Advantage, that is requiring potentially bid bonds, performance bonds, what have you, the heavy hitting projects similar to Town Hall. Is that $25,000 threshold where you would like to stay? Would you prefer to see that increase? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Does the staff recommend increasing it to $50,000 just to make things go faster and not be so bureaucratic? That's my
So I think-
question.
I think we have the potential to cut down on some time just because in terms of creating RFP documents and having them reviewed by the town attorney, that can be a significant slowing and sticking point. Barb might have a better memory of this than I do, but when it came time to put out the RFP for the compost pilot program, a relatively simple project, that did have, I think, a 2-week kind of timeline extension for getting it reviewed by the town attorney. And then when you look at a complex RFP such as the Yandell demolition, sorry, Barb.
No, I think
trauma
it kind of I think there's kind of a judgment call that maybe goes beyond the dollars, and I'm not trying to answer a question with a question, but when I think of compost crew, we already had a pretty good sense from talking to our neighbors as to who had bid it out, who else was out there. So I think going into preparing the RFP, I think if Kayla and I were betting people, we probably would have said we're going to end up with compost crew and we're not going to get a robust set of bids. I think if we look at something like our auditing services, which we'll be issuing later this year, early next year, the dollar value is on the lower side, but that's something that I think there's benefit to actually bidding out in a formal procurement sense. I will just say personally, I don't have strong feelings about doubling it to $50,000. I think there might be some middle ground between 25 and 50, in my opinion.
I would concur with that.
I mean, I think if there's maybe what you could provide for us this evening is perhaps some sense if you're comfortable maybe shifting off the 25,000, and then Kayla and I can kind of step back as we're working on the actual ordinance. But I think it would at least be helpful to know if there's at least any comfort level with potentially moving off the 25,000 as a starting point.
But the town council would still have to approve this.
That's kind of the second question that Kayla has in the bottom right.
Right. Okay.
So, pretty much at this point, anything that goes out for formal bids will have to come back to council because the dollar value is generally so much higher than what Barb or Joanna could approve. So can I get kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down, gut check?
I'm
Can
good
Barb
with
and
it.
Okay, so you're okay with us looking at changing the 25,000. Anyone else have feelings about the 25,000 limit?
Yeah, I'm good with even 50. I mean, if you look at the doors for a moment, we'd be stuck with having to do a sealed bid for the doors, even though there's only one vendor. So I would be fine with that.
I am too. I feel like all this stuff has to go through for reviews. If there's a big question, worst case is it comes up later. At least this covers us without having to do an inordinate amount of work for medium-sized things.
Okay, I think I've heard from everyone except Councilmember Bennett. Thumbs up, thumbs down, no strong feelings.
Yeah, I spoke up after Barb said that I'm okay with increasing the 25. I do think we ought to look at a middle ground or provide some caveat language about not always going sole source for that, for the higher amount.
We can definitely look at doing that. So that was question 1. Question 2 kind of touches upon what Lisa had brought up, which is what can Barb and or Joanna sign for to kind of keep operations moving versus at what dollar threshold does council want to be the one to authorize the contract? That's currently set at $10,000. Anything at or above 10,000 must come to council for signature. Is that still where you would like to keep it? Or are you open to potentially shifting it upwards?
I'd like to
be
keep it there.
interested if the staff has a recommendation.
I will say my off the cuff suggestion is I think there is room to potentially move a bit further north. I don't know. Kind of my gut reaction is to say, I think 15,000 would potentially be an option to consider, but that is an off the cuff. Just kind of throwing it out there as an upward movement that wouldn't be, you know, a significant change. Or I should say significant shock to the system. Barb,
Yeah.
do you have any?
Yeah, I would probably echo that comment. And, you know, I mean, obviously it has to be something that you all are comfortable with, but I think just in the same way, if you look at the fact that the $10,000 was set roughly 20 years ago, I think the other thing to perhaps to consider is if the item is budgeted, does that change your thinking in any way about what this threshold should be versus something like the play structure at Cambria, where there is no funding for what was to be done?
I'm
So
not
it's
sure
a
if a lot of our,
comparison.
okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just not sure if a lot of our things really are specifically budgeted. Like, even though the slide is, and we don't have a whole ton of things that are really budgeted that kind of come up from time to time, but I feel like I'd be comfortable bringing it up with inflation as long as there's a good reporting, even if it's not going to council for approval, at least it's mentioned in the town manager's report, one of the next meetings, because I think I just still have a little bit of wariness based on a recent big project where a lot of money was spent without any council approval or notice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want
So
that
a good
happening.
example of this is the lumber and light contract. It's budgeted and it had to come to us today to say, yeah, go ahead and pay it because it was above $10,000.
To kind of go into what Stephen was starting to get to, and I don't remember all the specifics, so please don't quote me on the number, but during my tenure with Westminster, they made some amendments to the code, kind of as you all are discussing here, to, you know, try to streamline procurement. When the level that used to go to require council approval was increased, kind of along the lines of what Stephen was getting at, we basically then had to, or we were requested, or we offered to, I don't remember how it went, but we essentially included as part of our financial report certain items that previously would have gone to council, but didn't under the new rules, so that they kind of had a sense of what was going on since the change happened. Which I think, Stephen, is sort of what you were suggesting, that there was at least at a minimum, if the number were to change, there's a reporting out.
Yeah, at least you see some of the action of it without getting into, don't need to know that you bought a box of a dozen pens, but if you buy a $4,000 printer, then that'd be kind of nice to at least have a record of those things.
So it's sounding like we're, as a group, open to considering it, which I think is enough for Barb and I to work on some draft language. And as a reminder, this will have to come back to you for review of the draft before it can be introduced and adopted. So we just want to make sure we're going in the right direction with what council is comfortable with. Moving on to.
I was going to just say, I will say that I was just quick looking through some of the budgets, you know, like town administration, well, not town committees, but infrastructure, town services, some of the other stuff, you know, you're looking at $200,000 a crack. So even if you went to 20,000, it's only 10% of the budget of that particular line item for an operational thing, and possibly a lot less for others. So yeah, I would definitely see increasing it and possibly to even around 20.
Okay, that is good information to have. Thank you for looping us in. So currently in our procurement guidelines, we have a whole lot of open doors for people to sign contracts, but they're not necessarily people who would be managing the contract and having to be the person holding vendors accountable to said contract. So what Barb and I had talked about was putting in some clarity of who is actually authorized to sign on contracts and putting in protective language such as contracts signed by other parties are not considered valid and will not be honored by the town, just as a way to protect and safeguard the town and make sure that things aren't happening without the town office being aware of them. I will remind council, have a record retention schedule that is approved by the Maryland State Archives that does give us guidelines for how we have to hang on to contracts. But it wouldn't hurt us to have language in our procurement code saying we are going to preserve all records and associated documents in line with our schedule. And this is more of just an administrative note of kind of who's responsible for what and what the expectations are for reporting out about projects. Does this seem reasonable? Is there something that council would like me to consider when Barb and I start talking draft language?
Yeah, I've got one for you. You need to go through the ordinances and the code because there's a bunch of odds and ends out there where certain people are authorized because they were in charge of roads or some damn thing to sign for road contracts. So you might want to just either find some language that will kill all that stuff, or you're going to have to go through the ordinances and quickly get rid of it. But it's definitely out there. There's at least a couple of them there that I know of.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
We can definitely look at that.
Yeah, I would look at that. Roads for sure. I can tell you that one is, I'm almost positive is there. The other one would be if the town manager signs something, I would expect that the mayor to monitor it, kind of flip flop of the two. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Definitely something we can consider and shift.
Yeah, I think part of the thinking for that would, trying to think how to put this, would be to kind of charge staff with, I think, the traditional role of project management as opposed to burdening an elected official with that in part.
That I was thinking more along the lines because of who's responsible for project oversight. I mean, management for sure. I agree with that 100%,
Yeah.
but oversight.
Okay.
We can adjust that question to say who is responsible for project management. We just want to make sure that we have some clarity of who we expect to be handling what. So thank you for flagging that was unclear with what we were going for. Any other members of council?
I just want to say I concur with Phil on those points.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we need to define what a project is or a dollar amount for a project. So if we buy a printer, that's really not a project. So I think we need to define what a project is as opposed to just a acquisition or a purchase of something.
That is
Would be
definitely something that we could come up with some language and come back to you all with. Barb, Westminster might actually have something in their definitions that we could use as a jumping point. So it sounds like folks are good with making abundantly and explicitly clear who the signatories are and calling out that we will not, as a town, honor contracts signed by other people. So I do appreciate that clarity. Okay, next slide. This is the final one. This is just our proposed timeline. You are currently over here on our second bubble where you've given us direction. We can come back with language for you all to look at in September. We call for formal introduction in September, but if we need to push back formal introduction a month, if council has questions about the draft language, that's easily doable. It would realistically still have us on track for getting this codified for the end of the calendar year, which, given the other project timelines we have going on, I think would be a good, robust timeline to make sure that we are compliant and have a robust code before we get into anything major.
I think based on the conversation I've heard this evening, I just a couple comments. It may be beneficial to sort of have I'm not saying a work session necessarily as a separate meeting, but to actually have an opportunity to walk through any proposed ordinance before it's actually before you for introduction. Obviously, you're just giving general guidance on kind of concepts this evening. The other thing I was just going to share, just in terms of the timeline, which just came up this afternoon, and talking to Wiedemann, we have tentatively slotted them in to basically present at the September Town Council meeting. And I would anticipate with questions and back and forth, that discussion alone could possibly go an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we want to be cognizant of not, weighting you down with too many difficult topics and going too late into the evening, but we can figure that out later in consultation with the mayor.
I would certainly agree with a work session, or at least a upfront or pre-release of the ordinance so that we could all look at it,
Sure.
be familiar with it.
We definitely want you all to be comfortable with something like this. So once Barb and I have a chance to talk about what we've talked about tonight and talk with Rumble, we can definitely kind of flag for you when we think you might be able to see draft language. And then we can have the conversation of, do we want a work session? Do we want an extended timeline where council reviews independently and potentially sets up one-on-one question and answer calls? We have some options, but I do appreciate council bearing with me for this late meeting. I think this is something really important for the town to have, and I am really grateful that you all were such troopers, but I think we're all ready for the next agenda item.
Excellent. I can be really fast about this. So, you know that we use Montgomery Municipal Cable to help facilitate our sharing of council meetings. They came out to 4th of July parade and took video. They've done some great stuff, and there's lots more that we can do. Problem is that our source of funding, the monies that fund our use of their services are going down because it's tied to people who subscribe to cable, television, paid cable on TV, and fewer people are doing that. So fewer revenues are dropping. And so what I would like is your approval to ask Montgomery Municipal League, Maryland Municipal League, to investigate, pursue a request to the state to institute a streaming tax as a replacement source of revenue for these monies that are diminishing because of people cutting the cord. So this is not asking us to do, this is just approving my asking MML to pursue this as a project with the state or with the General Assembly. Does that make sense? Following that?
Do you have an amount or a rate or any idea about what you're going to ask them to include in a tax?
No, that would be up to MML. I mean, at this point, this is just like, all I want to do is submit the idea, and then they would research what would be an appropriate thing, and it would go then to before the MML legislative committee, which is the sort of all the elected officials who are part of overseeing their legislative push for a given legislative session. In the past, this has been one of the issues for this was tax duplication. I think highway user funds were also emphasized by MML through this process. Separate, I think this current year, it had something to do with police accountability boards and whether municipalities could have their own as opposed to just relying on county. So this was an issue that came up with my work with Montgomery Municipal Cable. Not all counties have access to funds like this. So this would actually be a benefit to smaller communities where they maybe have to use general funds to pay for things like streaming and other, the stuff that we get through Montgomery Municipal Cable. But it would be definitely, I'm sure there would be support from the League of, what's the county, whatever the county equivalent is of MML. But so I've submitted an application to request this, or to request them to consider this legislative priority, but it needs your approval, and without it, they'll say, okay, let's find something else.
I'm good with it.
Okay.
Same.
Did you say something, Steve?
I'm good with it as well.
Okay.
So the proposal doesn't include a dollar amount or any kind of rate information. That's just suggesting the legislature explore that?
No, it's, I'm requesting that MML, which has 3, I guess they're lobbyists, that they would investigate the language and come up with an actual proposal. So all I'm asking them to do is, all I'm saying is, here's a problem. I would like MML to take a lead in pursuing a solution. And one of the solutions could be a streaming tax.
Ah, I see. Okay, I have no problem with it.
Phil, any concerns?
Yeah, I guess we'll go with it because I don't know right now what it would encompass. So, I mean, figure it out.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So the last item on the agenda, time is 11:25. Councilmember Bennett, Arboretum Committee updates.
Yeah, the committee just wanted to share that this spring, we planted an American elm near Penn Place, and dedicated it in honor of former town manager Ted Pratt, who recently passed away. And the committee is working on procuring a plaque for that and is planning a dedication ceremony with the family for this fall, probably shortly after Labor Day, which may precede our next council meeting. So thank you. Just want to make sure we got the word out. And of course, we'll advertise specifics through the listserv in the town office.
Okay. All right. This is very late. Time is 11:26, and I'm going to call it. We are adjourned.